Speed was his weapon, and instinct was his doctrine. Field Marshal Erwin Rommel did not fight wars by the book. He fought them by momentum, by intuition, and by the belief that hesitation was more dangerous than risk. Where others waited for perfect conditions, Rommel moved. Where others calculated, he pressed forward, and for a time, it worked brilliantly. Rommel rose to prominence not because he commanded vast resources, but because he understood how quickly opportunity disappears. In the early years of the war, his reputation was forged through motion, rapid advances, surprise attacks, and an ability to turn weakness into advantage before the enemy fully understood what was happening. Nowhere was this more visible than in North Africa. The desert offered no cover, no concealment, and no mercy. Supply lines stretched across hundreds of miles. Fuel mattered more than territory. Water mattered more than ideology. And yet, Rommel thrived there, maneuvering smaller, often undersupplied forces with a confidence that unsettled his opponents and inspired his men. The Africa Corps became synonymous with audacity. Sudden thrusts through open ground, attacks launched before defenses solidified, counterstrokes delivered when retreat seemed inevitable. Rommel earned a reputation as a battlefield commander who could see opportunity where others saw exhaustion. To his enemies, he became the desert fox, unpredictable, aggressive, and dangerously effective. To his soldiers, he was present at the front, visible, demanding, and invested in their survival. But speed has a cost. Rommel's successes often outran his supplies. Victories stretched lines thinner, fuel shortages halted advances at the worst moments. Reinforcements promised never arrived, and as the war progressed, the desert that once magnified his strengths began to expose his limits. He fought a war he could not control. Decisions were made far away. Resources were diverted elsewhere. Air superiority slipped from reach. At El Alamein, the balance finally shifted. Against a well-prepared enemy with overwhelming material advantage, Rommel's instinctive style collided with a reality that could not be maneuvered around. Momentum stalled, retreat followed, and the desert war, once fluid and unpredictable, settled into inevitability. Rommel was not blind to this. He understood when the war had turned. He recognized when sacrifice no longer led to victory. And increasingly, he found himself at odds with a leadership that demanded belief long after belief had lost its grounding. His later role in Europe reflected a commander caught between loyalty, realism, and responsibility. Tasked with defending the Atlantic Wall, Rommel again pushed for preparation rooted in experience rather than ideology. He argued that the next battle would be decided in hours, not weeks, that hesitation would be fatal, history would prove him right. Yet Rommel's story is not one of simple heroism or clean conclusions. It is a study in contradiction, a brilliant tactician bound to a failing cause, a leader respected by enemies, constrained by politics, a man celebrated for speed, undone by shortages he could not solve. Rommel did not shape the war alone, but he shaped how it was fought in the places he commanded. His legacy lives not in victory parades, but in lessons about initiative, adaptability, and the limits of individual brilliance in a total war. Tonight, we return to the deserts and coastlines where Rommel made his name, to the long supply roads and sudden advances, to the moments where instinct met consequence, to the life of a commander whose reputation outpaced the war he was forced to fight. This is not a myth. It is not a legend. It is the story of a man moving faster than the world around him, until the war caught up. And before we continue, I want to speak to you directly. If you're still here, listening carefully. If these long, thoughtful journeys into history help you slow down, reflect, or understand leadership under pressure a little more clearly, then I hope you'll consider subscribing. When you subscribe, you're not just supporting a channel, you're helping keep this calm, in-depth style of storytelling alive. If this space gives you perspective, focus, or simply somewhere steady to sit with history, then stay with me. Settle in. This is the story of Field Marshal Erwin Rommel. October 12, 1945. A cramped interrogation room in London, England. The air is thick with cigarette smoke and the weight of unanswered questions. A British intelligence officer, Captain Michael Bentley, sits across from yet another captured German general, watching the man's hands tremble as he lights his third cigarette in 15 minutes. The German's uniform is stripped of insignia, his face hollow from months in captivity, but his back remains straight. "You must understand," the general says, his English precise and practiced. "We were not all like them. Field Marshal Rommel, he fought with honor. He was a soldier, not a criminal." Bentley has heard variations of this statement from 7 different German officers in the past month. Every single one invokes the same name like a talisman against judgment. Every single one believes that somehow this particular general's reputation will protect them from what's coming. This is where the legend begins. Not in the deserts of North Africa, not in the burned-out villages of France, but in the desperate testimonies of defeated men seeking absolution. Within months of Germany's surrender, Rommel's name has become the most valuable currency in the moral bankruptcy of the former Wehrmacht. Generals who commanded mass executions claim they were following Rommel's example of restraint. Officers who burned villages invoke his supposed chivalry. Intelligence analysts like Bentley are watching something unprecedented unfold, the construction of a myth in real time, built from strategic amnesia and convenient lies. The man they describe bears little resemblance to the one in the files piled on Bentley's desk. Yet, even Bentley finds himself wanting to believe it, because the alternative is too disturbing to contemplate. If Rommel was just another Nazi general, then the British have been selling their public a dangerous fiction for years. June 1942. The House of Commons, London. Winston Churchill rises to address Parliament during one of Britain's darkest hours. The war is going badly on every front. Singapore has fallen. Burma is collapsing. U-boats are sinking ships faster than Britain can build them. And in North Africa, a German general with limited forces and impossible supply lines has just captured the fortress of Tobruk, taking 35,000 British troops prisoner in a single day. Churchill knows he must somehow explain this humiliation to a nation growing weary of defeat. So he does something extraordinary. He praises the enemy commander. "We have a very daring and skillful opponent against us," Churchill tells the House. And, may I say, across the havoc of war, a great general. The chamber erupts in protest. 73 letters arrive at 10 Downing Street within a week, many from families of men killed fighting this great general. But Churchill's calculation is deliberate and cold. If Rommel is brilliant, then British defeats are honorable. If he's merely competent, then Britain's losses are humiliating. The speech creates something that will outlive both Churchill and Rommel: permission to admire the enemy. British newspapers begin running features on the Desert Fox, a nickname they invent that sounds more like a character from a boy's adventure novel than a general commanding troops for Adolf Hitler. Captured British soldiers are interviewed about Rommel's supposed fairness, while stories of German atrocities in North Africa are quietly filed away. The propaganda works in ways Churchill never intended. By the time the war ends, Rommel has become the Nazi general it's acceptable to respect, the one who supposedly fought cleanly, the one who wasn't really one of them. This image will prove extraordinarily durable and extraordinarily useful. In 1955, West Germany joins NATO. The Western Allies need former Wehrmacht officers to command the new Bundeswehr. They need Germans to believe they can serve in a military organization without shame. And they need a symbol that German military tradition can be separated from Nazi crimes. Enter Basil Liddell Hart, the British military theorist who will become Rommel's most important advocate. In 1951, Liddell Hart publishes The Rommel Papers, supposedly a faithful translation of the Field Marshal's wartime writings. The book becomes an immediate bestseller, translated into 14 languages, establishing Rommel as a military genius whose talents were squandered by Hitler's interference. There's just one problem. It's not quite what Rommel actually wrote. Liddell Hart has access to Rommel's letters, diaries, and operational reports, provided by Rommel's widow, Lucy. But he doesn't publish them raw. He edits, contextualizes, and occasionally rewrites passages to fit his thesis. References to Hitler that are merely dutiful become critical. Passages accepting Nazi racial ideology are deleted entirely. Sections where Rommel blames subordinates for failures are softened. A German researcher will discover, decades later, that approximately 23% of the original material was excluded from publication. The omissions aren't random. Every deletion makes Rommel more sympathetic, more independent-minded, more troubled by Nazi excesses. An entire dimension of the man, his genuine belief in Hitler until very late in the war, his willingness to accept brutal measures against civilians, his political naivety that bordered on willful blindness, simply vanishes. Little Hart isn't deliberately lying. He believes he's revealing the real Rommel beneath the Nazi propaganda, but in doing so, he creates a different kind of propaganda, one that will prove even more effective. He gives the world a Nazi general who wasn't really a Nazi, a Wehrmacht officer who supposedly kept his hands clean, a German military hero safe for democratic nations to study and even admire. The consequences ripple outward through the 1950s and beyond. By 1959, 14 towns in West Germany have named streets after Rommel. The Bundeswehr opens the Rommel barracks in Dornstadt, near his birthplace. British and American military academies teach Rommel's tactics at Gazala, while ignoring the strategic failures that made his victories meaningless. Israeli military historians study his campaigns, finding lessons in mobile warfare. Hollywood prepares films depicting him as the good German who ultimately turned against Hitler. Every major Western military produces studies of his leadership style. He becomes the most analyzed, most written about, most cinematically portrayed general of World War II, surpassing even Patton and Montgomery in popular imagination. Yet the man they're studying is increasingly fictional, a composite of selective facts, convenient omissions, and retrospective wishful thinking. But myths don't survive intact once historians start asking uncomfortable questions. In the 1990s, as archives across the former Soviet Union and Eastern Europe open, new documents begin surfacing. Military historians examining Rommel's actual command decisions find patterns that don't match the legend. His logistics were consistently disastrous, not because of bad luck, but because he refused to think about them. His disobedience of orders wasn't bold initiative, but dangerous ego, putting subordinates in impossible positions. His famous chivalry extended only to British officers, not to colonial troops, not to civilians, and certainly not to Jews. In July 1942, while Rommel was advancing toward El Alamein, his command area in Tunisia saw the systematic roundup of Jewish civilians for forced labor. Over 2,500 Tunisian Jews were taken from their homes, many never to return. Rommel's headquarters coordinated this operation. The evidence doesn't support accusations that Rommel personally ordered these actions, but it clearly demonstrates he knew about them, approved transportation and guards for them, and did nothing to stop them. This isn't anomalous. It's consistent with his broader record. A general so focused on tactical operations that he treated everything else, logistics, strategy, political implications, moral consequences, as someone else's problem. The Rommel who emerges from unedited documents is neither the noble knight of Allied mythology nor a convinced Nazi ideologue. He's something more disturbing and more common. A professionally brilliant man who served absolute evil through a combination of ambition, political ignorance, and moral compartmentalization. He wanted glory, advancement, and Hitler's approval. He got all three. The price was paid by others. 2024, Hamburg, Germany. The city council debates whether to rename Rommel Street, a quiet residential road in the Langenhorn district. Protesters gather outside City Hall, holding signs reading, "No honor for Wehrmacht commanders," and "Colonial victims deserve memory too." Inside, historians testify about newly discovered documents. A council member reads aloud from a 1942 report, describing forced labor conditions in Tunisia under Afrika Korps administration. Another presents evidence of Rommel's units participating in the seizure of Jewish property. The debate becomes heated, generational, touching raw nerves about German memory and responsibility. The street keeps its name by a narrow vote, but the decision satisfies no one. Those who wanted it changed feel defeated. Those who oppose the change feel defensive. Everyone leaves the chamber aware that the conversation is far from over. This is where we are now. 80 years after Rommel's death, still arguing about him, still trying to separate the man from the legend, still discovering evidence that complicates our neat categories. The myth persists because it served too many purposes for too many people. The Allies needed a good German to justify their own wartime propaganda and post-war German rearmament. The Bundeswehr needed an untainted military tradition. Military historians needed a figure whose tactical brilliance could be studied without moral contamination. Popular culture needed a Nazi you could root for in historical dramas. And Germany itself needed heroes from an era when heroism in service of the state meant complicity in genocide. But myths are fragile things. They survive only as long as we don't look too closely at the evidence. Rommel's genius was real. His understanding of combined arms warfare, his speed of decision-making, his personal courage under fire. But genius isn't morality. Tactical brilliance doesn't confer ethical wisdom. And serving evil skillfully doesn't make you honorable. The real Erwin Rommel was more complex, more flawed, and more historically important than either his admirers or detractors have acknowledged. Understanding him requires confronting not just what he did, but what we've needed him to be, and why we built him into something he never was. That confrontation begins here. November 15, 1891. A modest apartment in Heidenheim, a small town in the Kingdom of Württemberg, southern Germany. Erwin Johannes Eugen Rommel enters the world to the sound of church bells and his father's anxious pacing. His mother, Helene, holds the infant close, counting fingers and toes by candlelight while the midwife cleans up. His father, Erwin Rommel Sr., is a mathematics teacher at the local Realschule, earning 3,200 marks annually, roughly the same as a skilled craftsman or minor civil servant. This is not wealth. This is not aristocracy. This is the solid, respectable, slightly anxious middle class of Wilhelmina, Germany, where social position is everything, and one's family name determines opportunity. Young Erwin is born into a society with rigid class barriers, and from his first breath, he exists on the wrong side of the most important one. The Prussian officer corps that dominates the German military considers itself a hereditary elite, drawn almost exclusively from the Junker nobility of Brandenburg and East Prussia. Württemberg boys like Rommel are provincial, middle class, forever marked as outsiders. His childhood offers few hints of military genius. Neighbors remember a quiet, somewhat sickly boy with pale complexion and blonde hair, more interested in building model airplanes than playing soldier. He's smaller than other children his age, physically unimpressive, prone to respiratory infections that keep him home from school for weeks at a time. His father, demanding and exacting, pushes academics hard. Young Rommel struggles, particularly with languages and humanities. He's drawn instead to mathematics and technical subjects, showing an intuitive understanding of mechanical relationships. At 14, he tells his father he wants to become an engineer, perhaps to design aircraft or automobiles. The elder Rommel dismisses this immediately. Engineers are middle-class tradesmen, however educated. Officers are gentlemen. The military offers one of the few paths where a talented boy from modest background might rise above his origins. In 1909, at age 17, Rommel reluctantly applies to join the Imperial German Army. The application process exposes the class barriers he'll fight his entire career. His first choice is the artillery, considered the most technically sophisticated branch, requiring mathematical aptitude and offering better promotion prospects. He's rejected without explanation. The artillery draws its officers almost exclusively from families with military traditions or aristocratic connections. Rommel has neither. Instead, he's assigned to the 124th Württemberg Infantry Regiment as an officer cadet, essentially a trainee with no guarantee of permanent commission. It's a blow to his ambitions, a reminder that in Wilhelmina, Germany, birth matters more than ability. He arrives at the military school in Danzig in July 1910, one of 83 cadets, already marked as provincial by his southern accent and middle-class manners. The Prussian cadets, sons of generals and landowners, form an exclusive inner circle. They have family military traditions going back generations. They discuss campaigns their grandfathers fought, regiments their fathers commanded. Rommel has none of this. He's tolerated, not accepted. He responds the only way he knows how, through sheer physical determination. Too small to dominate through size, too poor to compete through family connections, Rommel transforms himself into the most physically fit cadet in his class. He runs every morning before formation, regardless of weather. He swims in the Baltic Sea through October. He boxes, wrestles, does hundreds of push-ups until his arms shake. His classmates think he's compensating, proving something. They're right. Every repetition is an argument against the aristocratic assumptions that define the officer corps. You say I'm inferior because of my birth? Watch me outrun, outfight, outendure every nobleman in this school. It's exhausting, unsustainable, and it works. By graduation in November 1911, Rommel ranks 23rd out of 83 cadets, solidly above average, though not distinguished enough for the general staff track reserved for the truly elite. His first posting back to the 124th Infantry in Weingarten brings a measure of stability and an encounter that will shape his entire life. At a dance in Danzig before graduation, he meets Lucy Mollin, daughter of a Prussian landowner. She's well-educated, multilingual, from precisely the class background Rommel lacks. By every social calculation, she should dismiss him as a provincial officer from an undistinguished family. Instead, they form an immediate connection. She sees past the class markers to something else, an intensity, a seriousness of purpose, a kind of focused determination, rare in the casual aristocrats she normally meets. They begin corresponding. Her letters are witty, cultured, filled with literary references and gentle teasing. His are earnest, detailed, describing military training with engineering-like precision. Their families are skeptical. Her father considers Rommel beneath his daughter socially. His parents worry that a Prussian wife will look down on Württemberg provincialism. The young couple ignores all objections. The years 1911 through 14 pass in the grinding routine of peacetime military service. Rommel trains his platoon in field exercises, studies military history in his sparse off-duty hours, and writes long letters to Lucy, filled with tactical observations and plans for their future. His commanding officers note his competence, but not brilliance. His fitness reports describe him as capable and thorough, the kind of faint praise that indicates a solid but unremarkable officer. He shows no sign of the tactical genius that will later define him. Instead, he's methodical, detail-oriented, perhaps too earnest. His fellow officers find him somewhat humorless, too focused on proving himself. The aristocratic clique still excludes him from their social circle. He pretends not to care, throwing himself deeper into training, but the letters to Lucy reveal the hurt. They see only my father's profession, not my abilities, he writes in March 1914. Someday I will force them to judge me by my actions. He has no idea how soon that opportunity will come, or how terrible the price. August 1914. The world Rommel has known his entire life shatters in a matter of weeks. Archduke Franz Ferdinand is assassinated in Sarajevo. Austria issues an ultimatum to Serbia. Russia mobilizes to defend Serbia. Germany mobilizes to support Austria. France mobilizes per its alliance with Russia. Britain enters to defend Belgian neutrality. Suddenly, all the peacetime training, all the theoretical discussions, all the status anxieties of the officer corps become irrelevant. War has arrived, the war all of Europe has been expecting and dreading and half desiring for a generation. The 124th Infantry Regiment receives mobilization orders on August 1st. Rommel, now a lieutenant, commands a platoon in the regiment's 3rd Battalion. They entrain for the Western Front on August 7th, packed into cattle cars with equipment, singing patriotic songs, convinced they'll be home by Christmas. The trains roll west through cheering crowds. No one yet understands what industrialized warfare will mean. August 22, 1914. Near the village of Blade, France, just across the Belgian border. This is Rommel's first combat, and it's nothing like the training exercises. The French hold a wood line 600 meters ahead. German doctrine calls for careful reconnaissance, artillery preparation, then coordinated assault. But Rommel's company commander is killed by a sniper in the first minutes, and the lieutenant leading the company's assault has frozen behind a farm wall. Rommel's platoon is supposed to provide covering fire, while the assault element advances. Instead, he makes a decision that will characterize his entire military career. He charges. Not with his entire platoon, which would be suicidal. With 3 men he knows are steady under fire. They sprint across open ground while French rifles crack overhead, reach a depression 20 meters from the French position, then rush the trench before the defenders can react. 15 French soldiers surrender to 4 Germans. Rommel's commanding officer is simultaneously furious at the insubordination and impressed by the result. It's the first time Rommel discovers what will become his core tactical principle. Aggressive action at the decisive point can shatter enemy cohesion before they can respond. It works because the French platoon, expecting a prepared assault with artillery support, is psychologically unprepared for 4 men appearing suddenly in their trench. They don't calculate odds rationally, they panic. This is the advantage of shock, speed, and surprise over methodical planning. Rommel has stumbled onto something the German army will later systematize as infiltration tactics, but in August 1914, it's pure instinct and desperation. The action earns him his first commendation and first wound, a bullet through his left thigh that sends him to hospital for 3 weeks. He's back with his unit by mid-September, limping slightly, carrying a new certainty that audacity works. It's a dangerous lesson, one that will serve him brilliantly in some situations and disastrously in others. But for now, as the Western Front congeals into the static horror of trench warfare, Rommel has found his purpose. The next 3 years will forge him in ways that peacetime training never could. He'll be wounded twice more, a bullet through his left arm in September 1914, a shrapnel wound to the same arm in July 1916. He'll fight in the Argonne, in Verdun, in Romania. He'll perfect the art of night infiltration, leading small teams through no man's land to capture positions 10 times their number. He'll develop a reputation as a commander who takes insane risks yet somehow survives, who asks impossible things from his men, yet keeps casualties lower than officers using conventional tactics. The aristocratic officers who once dismissed him now study his methods. But Rommel isn't climbing the social ladder. He's rendering it irrelevant. In the mud and blood of industrial warfare, birthright means nothing. Results are everything. And Rommel is getting results no one else can match. The boy from Heidenheim is becoming someone the German army can't ignore, someone whose tactical innovations will influence warfare for generations. But he's also becoming someone whose hunger for recognition will override caution, whose need to prove himself will push him past rational limits. The question isn't whether he'll achieve greatness. The question is what he'll sacrifice to obtain it, and who will pay the price. October 24, 1917, 4:30 in the morning. The base of Mount Matagiur in northeastern Italy, on the Isonzo front. Captain Erwin Rommel crouches in pre-dawn darkness with his Württemberg Mountain Battalion, studying the cliff face rising 1,500 meters above. His orders are simple and insane. Assault a heavily fortified mountain defended by Italian positions dug into solid rock, capture the summit, and do it before other German units advancing along parallel routes. The entire Austro-German offensive depends on speed, on breaking through Italian lines before reserves can arrive. Rommel has 500 men. Intelligence estimates 9,000 Italian defenders on the mountain, supported by artillery positioned to sweep every approach. Standard doctrine calls for artillery bombardment, followed by methodical advance. Rommel has a different idea. He's going to bypass all the defensive positions, climb straight up the mountain through terrain the Italians consider impassable, and appear behind their main line before they know he's coming. His officers think he's mad. His men have learned to trust his madness. The assault begins in silence, no preparatory bombardment to alert defenders. Rommel leads from the front, as always, navigating by compass through fog so thick he can barely see 3 meters ahead. The mountain is supposed to be impassable. That's precisely why he's chosen this route. The Italians have concentrated defenses where they expect attacks, leaving the impossible approaches thinly guarded. It's the same principle he discovered at Blide in 1914. Find where the enemy isn't looking, then strike before they can react. The climb is brutal. Men slip on wet rock, equipment clatters, and every noise sounds deafening in the fog. They encounter the 1st Italian position at dawn, a machine gun nest covering the conventional approach. The Italians are looking down the mountain, not up. Rommel's detachment walks past them in the fog, so close he can hear them talking. They capture the position from behind without firing a shot. The pattern repeats as they climb. Italian positions oriented to defend against frontal assault are taken from unexpected angles, often without resistance. Rommel has grasped something fundamental about defensive psychology. Soldiers dig in, facing the direction they expect attack, creating blind spots everywhere else. At 10:30 a.m., 12 hours after starting, his battalion reaches the summit ridge. They've climbed 1,500 meters, bypassed or captured 16 separate positions, and taken minimal casualties. The Italian defenders are scattered across the mountain in isolated strongpoints, none able to support the others, all suddenly aware that German troops are behind them. What happens next reveals both Rommel's tactical genius and his understanding of psychological warfare. Instead of consolidating his position and waiting for reinforcements, he orders immediate exploitation down the reverse slope toward the rear Italian positions. The descent is even faster than the climb. Italian units, seeing Germans attacking from their rear, assume they're surrounded by a much larger force. Entire companies surrender to Rommel's platoons. Officers emerge from bunkers with white flags, shocked to discover they're capitulating to a force a tenth their size. By late afternoon, on October 26th, Rommel's 500 men have captured 9,000 Italian soldiers, 81 artillery pieces, and 15 machine guns. The math is absurd, impossible by conventional military logic, but Rommel has understood something that will define his entire career. In fluid situations, perception matters more than actual force. The Italians saw Germans in unexpected positions and assumed catastrophic defeat. Their command structure collapsed before Rommel fired most of his ammunition. It's warfare as psychology, as controlled chaos, as the exploitation of enemy assumptions. It's brilliant, and it teaches him the wrong lesson. The right lesson from Matadur is that infiltration tactics work when you have surprise, when the enemy is unprepared, when confusion can substitute for force. The wrong lesson is that audacity always works, that speed can overcome any obstacle, that you can defeat larger forces through sheer aggression. Rommel learns the wrong lesson. His superiors shower him with praise. The German press celebrates him as the ghost of Matadur. At 26 years old, he receives the Pour le Mérite, Germany's highest military honor, typically reserved for generals and aces. He's the youngest captain in the German army to receive it. The recognition he's craved since Danzig Military School arrives in overwhelming measure. Aristocratic officers who once looked through him now study his tactics. The general staff requests his after-action reports as training examples. He's invited to lecture at military academies. The boy from Heidenheim has forced the Prussian elite to acknowledge his superiority through sheer competence. But there's a cost. Rommel's style requires personal leadership at the crisis point, physical presence where decisions get made. He can't direct operations from a headquarters tent. He needs to see the terrain, sense the enemy's confusion, exploit opportunities the moment they appear. It works at battalion level, where one man can influence hundreds. The question no one asks in 1917 is whether it can scale. Can these methods work commanding thousands, tens of thousands? Can you infiltrate and exploit when you're responsible for entire fronts, when logistics and coordination matter as much as tactical surprise? Rommel never considers these questions. He's discovered his genius and believes it's universal. Every success reinforces this belief. Every risk that pays off makes him more certain that conventional caution is for lesser officers. He's learned to trust his instincts, to push beyond what others think possible, to ignore pessimistic staff officers who worry about flanks and supply lines. The final year of war offers no opportunity to test these methods at larger scale. By 1918, the Western Front has devolved into attritional nightmare, where individual brilliance barely matters. Rommel spends most of the year in staff positions, planning operations he never executes, watching Germany's strategic position collapse despite tactical successes. The British blockade is starving the homeland. American troops are arriving in overwhelming numbers. The Kaiser's government is fragmenting. None of this is visible from tactical level, where German units continue fighting effectively until the last weeks. Rommel, like most frontline officers, never experiences clear military defeat. His units don't break. Enemy forces don't overrun his positions. Instead, politicians in Berlin sign armistice agreements while the army remains in the field. This will poison German military thought for a generation. The stab in the back myth. The belief that Germany lost politically what it hadn't lost militarily. November 11, 1918. Rommel receives news of the armistice in a German barracks in France. Surrounded by officers in varying states of shock, rage, and relief, his immediate reaction, recorded in a letter to Lucy, reveals everything about his political understanding. We were not defeated in the field. We could have continued fighting. This is betrayal by the weak at home. He genuinely believes this. At tactical level, German units still hold French and Belgian territory. But Rommel has no comprehension of strategic exhaustion, economic collapse, or social disintegration. He's a brilliant tactical operator with the strategic vision of a company commander. This wouldn't matter if he remained at company level. But Germany's post-war army, restricted to 100,000 men, will keep only its best officers. Rommel's record guarantees retention. He's decorated, proven, and written up in training manuals. He'll be promoted to positions requiring strategic judgment he doesn't possess. His tactical genius will eventually place him in situations where tactics aren't enough. The immediate post-war years are chaotic and bitter. Rommel returns to a Germany he barely recognizes. Communist uprisings, right-wing militias, hyperinflation, political assassinations. The empire has become the Weimar Republic, a democracy nobody seems to want, imposed by victorious allies and accepted by exhausted Germans. The army, reduced from millions to 100,000, becomes a fortress of conservative values in an unstable society. Rommel, now a captain in the Reichswehr, finds himself commanding troops against communist insurgents in Friedrichshafen. It's his first experience of internal security operations. German soldiers shooting German citizens. His letters to Lucy during this period are telling. He describes the communists as traitors who stabbed the army in the back, using the exact language that's metastasizing into Nazi mythology. He shows no sympathy for the economic desperation driving unrest, no recognition that hyperinflation has destroyed middle-class savings and working-class wages. Instead, he sees only disorder that must be suppressed. Weakness that allowed Germany's defeat, politicians who betrayed soldiers' sacrifices. These aren't unusual views among Reichswehr officers. The entire officer corps shares this resentment, this sense that Germany lost because civilians failed, not because the military strategy was flawed. But Rommel's resentment is especially personal. He fought brilliantly, earned Germany's highest honors, proved himself superior to aristocrats who once dismissed him. And for what? Germany is occupied, humiliated, stripped of colonies and military power. His decorations feel worthless in a defeated nation. The Pour le Mérite, once the empire's highest honor, is now a relic of a vanished world. Rommel's entire identity is bound up in military excellence, and military excellence has been rendered meaningless by political collapse. He needs someone to blame, some explanation that preserves his sense of accomplishment, while explaining catastrophic defeat. The stab in the back myth provides exactly this. It wasn't that Germany's strategy failed, that the blockade worked, that America's entry was decisive. It was that weak politicians and communist traitors gave up while the army could still fight. Rommel believes this absolutely. It will make him vulnerable to a very specific kind of political seduction, one that promises restoration of military honor and revenge for political betrayal. That seduction has a name, and in 1935, Rommel will meet him face to face, January 1923, the Rommel apartment in Stuttgart-Württemberg. Erwin Rommel sits at his kitchen table, watching his wife Lucy cry over a stack of worthless banknotes. They represent his father's life savings, carefully accumulated over 40 years of teaching mathematics to provincial school children. 3 years ago, these marks could have purchased a modest house. Today, they might buy a loaf of bread. if you can find bread. Hyperinflation has destroyed the German middle class overnight. People carry money in wheelbarrows because a briefcase can't hold enough for basic groceries. Life savings evaporate daily. Rommel's army salary, once comfortable, now purchases almost nothing. He's paid billions of marks monthly, a meaningless number in an economy where prices change by the hour. His father, Erwin Sr., retired on what should have been a comfortable pension, is destitute. The mathematics teacher who demanded excellence, who pushed his son toward military service because it offered security, has lost everything. He'll die 2 years later, essentially from poverty-related illness in a nation that 3 years earlier was Europe's dominant industrial power. Rommel watches this devastation with rage. He has no way to express effectively. He's a military officer in a military restricted to 100,000 men by the Treaty of Versailles, barred from possessing tanks, heavy artillery, or aircraft. Germany's army, which 4 years ago fielded millions, has been reduced to a constabulary force incapable of defending the nation's borders, let alone its dignity. The treaty feels deliberately humiliating, reparations calculated to cripple the German economy, territorial losses that leave millions of ethnic Germans under foreign rule, and a war guilt clause forcing Germany to accept sole responsibility for the conflict. Rommel, like most Reichswehr officers, considers this a monstrous injustice. His entire tactical experience confirms that German forces were never defeated decisively in the field. They conducted fighting withdrawals, held defensive positions, and remained organized until the armistice. To accept that Germany bore sole responsibility for the war feels like accepting that his military service, his decorations, his comrades' sacrifices were all in service of criminal aggression. He can't accept this, won't accept this. So he embraces the alternative narrative taking hold across the German right. The Dolchstoß-Legende, the stab in the back myth. Germany didn't lose militarily. The army was betrayed by communists, socialists, and Jews who spread defeatism on the home front, who organized strikes in munitions factories, who signed the armistice while German troops still held enemy territory. This explanation preserves military honor while explaining catastrophic defeat. It's historically false. Germany's military position in November 1918 was hopeless. The naval blockade had created mass starvation, and the Army's spring 1918 offensive had spent its last reserves without achieving decision. But Rommel lacks the strategic perspective to understand this. At his level, tactical operations continued successfully until politicians signed surrender documents. Therefore, politicians must be to blame. It's a comforting lie that transforms defeat into betrayal, preserving self-worth while fueling resentment. The Weimar Republic offers Rommel nothing he values. Democracy means political parties arguing while the economy collapses. Parliamentary debate looks like weakness compared to military decisiveness. The government seems to constantly apologize to France and Britain while Germans suffer. Rommel, like many officers, views the Republic as the political embodiment of defeat, illegitimate, foreign-imposed, sustained by the same forces that supposedly betrayed the army. His letters from this period drip with contempt for political chaos and longing for strong leadership. He's not politically sophisticated enough to articulate a coherent ideology. He just knows the current system is intolerable, that Germany deserves restoration, that military virtues of hierarchy and discipline are superior to democratic compromise. These aren't unusual views in the Reichswehr. The entire officer corps shares this resentment and conservatism. They're training an army that might someday overthrow the republic they ostensibly serve. But Rommel isn't spending these years plotting coups. He's too professional, too focused on military excellence for that. Instead, he throws himself into the role available to him. Instructor. In 1929, he's assigned to the Dresden Infantry School, teaching tactics to the next generation of German officers. The position is prestigious, the cadets are talented, and Rommel discovers he's an exceptional teacher. He can break down complex tactical problems into simple principles. He uses his war experiences as vivid examples. He emphasizes speed, surprise, and exploitation over methodical planning. His lectures are popular, his methods influential, and in 1933, he decides to write them down. The result is Infantry Greift on, Infantry Attacks, a tactical manual based on his World War I experiences. Published in October 1937, it becomes an unexpected bestseller. Infantry Attacks sells 400,000 copies, extraordinary for a military manual. It's readable, specific, filled with dramatic narratives of actual combat operations. Rommel has a gift for making tactics comprehensible to non-specialists while providing enough detail for professionals to learn from. He describes specific battles he fought in, explaining his thought process at each decision point. The book becomes required reading in German military schools and spreads internationally. British and French military theorists study it. American officers incorporate its lessons. Most significantly, Adolf Hitler reads it. The Führer, who prides himself on military knowledge despite never rising above corporal rank, is impressed by Rommel's emphasis on aggressive action and willpower overcoming material disadvantage. Hitler makes notes in the margins. He orders additional copies for Nazi Party officials. And in October 1935, when Hitler needs a military escort for Nazi demonstrations, he specifically requests the author of this impressive tactical manual, October 15, 1935, a massive Nazi rally in Goslar, Lower Saxony. Rommel, now a colonel, has been assigned to command the army units providing security for Hitler's appearance. It's his first direct contact with the Nazi leadership. He's professionally skeptical. The Nazis seem like political rabble-rousers, not serious military men. Their brown-shirted SA militia appears undisciplined compared to regular army standards. But when Hitler speaks, something shifts. The Führer's speech that day focuses on themes that resonate viscerally with Rommel. Germany's humiliation by Versailles, the betrayal by weak politicians, the need for military restoration, the promise of national renewal through strength. Hitler positions the Nazi movement as the political expression of frontline soldiers' values: loyalty, sacrifice, honor, betrayed by the Weimar system. He praises the German military as undefeated in battle, stabbed in the back by internal enemies. He promises rearmament, restoration of lost territories, and revenge for the November criminals who signed the armistice. Rommel listens transfixed. Here is a political leader who speaks his language, who validates his experience, who promises to restore what was taken from Germany and from soldiers like him. Hitler makes no demands for political sophistication or ideological commitment. He simply offers restoration of military honor and national greatness through strength rather than compromise. For Rommel, politically naive and resentful of 15 years of national humiliation, it's intoxicating. That evening, he writes in his diary, "Finally, a leader who understands soldiers' honor. This man will restore Germany's greatness." It's not an enthusiastic embrace of Nazi ideology. Rommel never reads Mein Kampf, shows no interest in racial theory, and largely ignores the anti-Semitic components of Nazi doctrine. But he doesn't need ideological commitment. He just needs someone promising to avenge November 1918 and restore German military power. Hitler offers both. Over the next 3 years, Rommel's career accelerates in ways unimaginable under the Weimar Republic. Hitler personally approves his promotion to brigadier general in 1938. He's assigned command of the war school at Wiener Neustadt in Austria, immediately after the Anschluss. He commands Hitler's personal security battalion during the occupation of Czechoslovakia, riding in the vehicle directly behind the Führer through Prague. These aren't coincidences. Hitler has been systematically elevating officers who combine military competence with political reliability, or at least political compliance. Rommel isn't a true believer in Nazi ideology. He's something more useful. A talented officer who equates Hitler's political program with Germany's military restoration, who asks no uncomfortable questions about means because he's fixated on ends. He sees the Wehrmacht rearming, tanks, aircraft, modern artillery, everything the Versailles Treaty forbade. He sees Germany reoccupying the Rhineland, annexing Austria, seizing Czechoslovakia, all without firing a shot. From his perspective, Hitler has achieved in 5 years what democratic politicians couldn't accomplish in 15. Why question the methods of obvious success? The question Rommel never asks, the question that might have saved him from complicity, is where this is heading. Hitler's speeches promise not just restoration, but conquest. Not just revision of Versailles, but dominance of Europe. Not just military strength, but racial purification and Lebensraum in the East. The signs are visible to anyone willing to see them. Kristallnacht in November. 1938 sees synagogues burned and Jewish businesses destroyed across Germany. The Nuremberg laws have stripped German Jews of citizenship and legal protection. Nazi rhetoric increasingly describes Slavs as subhuman, suitable for slavery or elimination. Concentration camps hold thousands of political prisoners and undesirables. But Rommel sees none of this as his concern. He's a soldier, not a politician. His job is military operations, not social policy. This compartmentalization, the ability to focus narrowly on tactical problems while ignoring larger context, is his fatal flaw. It allows him to serve absolute evil while maintaining self-image as honorable soldier. It lets him benefit from Nazi patronage while claiming detachment from Nazi crimes. And, in August 1939, when Hitler orders invasion of Poland, Rommel obeys without hesitation, without moral qualms, without recognizing he's participating in a war of annihilation that will kill tens of millions. He's thrilled to finally have a combat command again. The tactical opportunities look magnificent. The strategic implications and moral consequences simply don't register. They never do. May 10, 1940, 4:35 in the morning. The Belgian-German border near the town of Martelange. The first tanks of the 7th Panzer Division rumble across the frontier in pre-dawn darkness, their commander standing in the lead vehicle's turret hatch despite explicit orders to remain with his headquarters element. Major General Erwin Rommel has been in command of this division for barely 2 months. And he's already established a pattern that will define his leadership. He ignores instructions, leads from the front, and makes decisions based on what he personally observes rather than what staff officers report. The 7th Panzer is part of Fall Gelb, Case Yellow, Germany's assault on France, Belgium, and the Netherlands. The plan is brilliant and audacious. Armored divisions will drive through the Ardennes forest, considered by French military planners to be impassable for large formations, cross the Meuse River, and race to the English Channel, cutting Allied forces in two. Rommel's division has been assigned a supporting role, advancing behind the main Schwerpunkt at Sedan. But Rommel has no intention of playing support. He intends to lead. The first hours reveal his methods and their dangers. 7th Panzer is supposed to advance along assigned routes, maintaining formation, coordinating with adjacent units. Rommel instead pushes his lead elements forward at maximum speed, bypassing resistance rather than reducing it, maintaining momentum at all costs. His division advances so fast that German High Command loses track of its position. Radio communications with headquarters become sporadic. Rommel doesn't want to stop advancing to report his location. His staff officers are frantic, filling out maps with question marks where their commanding generals should be. Other German units, trying to coordinate movements, can't locate 7th Panzer. Allied forces don't know where it is either, which creates its own confusion. French intelligence reports German armor appearing in locations where no German armor should exist, then vanishing before reinforcements arrive. By the end of the first day, 7th Panzer has advanced 30 miles, 3 times farther than Doctrine anticipated. Rommel has also lost contact with his own supply columns. May 13. The Meuse River at Dinant, Belgium. This is supposed to be the moment when German momentum stops. The Meuse is a serious obstacle, 70 meters wide, backed by French fortifications on the western bank. French doctrine assumes any attempt to force a river crossing will require days of preparation. Engineers building crossing sites, artillery suppressing defenders, infantry securing the far bank before armor attempts to cross. Rommel arrives at the river in mid-afternoon to find his advance unit stalled by French fire. Standard procedure is to halt, bring up artillery, prepare a deliberate assault for the next morning. Rommel instead grabs a rifle from a nearby soldier, wades into the river to personally gauge the current, then orders immediate assault crossing. His engineer battalion starts inflating rubber boats while French machine guns sweep the water. Casualties are mounting. The crossing attempt appears suicidal. Then Rommel does something that reveals both tactical brilliance and personal recklessness. He positions himself on the eastern bank with the division's artillery, personally directing fire missions against French positions he can see from the riverbank. He's a general acting as a forward artillery observer, exposing himself to rifle fire while calling corrections for his gunners. It's tactically unnecessary. He has perfectly competent artillery officers for this. But it's psychologically powerful. His soldiers watch their commanding generals standing under fire, spotting targets, directing suppression as calmly as if on a training exercise. The message is clear. If the old man isn't afraid, why should we be? The assault boats launch. Some are hit, spilling soldiers into the current. Others reach the far bank and disgorge infantry who scramble up the western slope. By dusk, 7th Panzer has a bridgehead. By dawn on May 14, his engineers have pontoon bridges erected and tanks are crossing. The impassable river has been forced in less than 24 hours with relatively light casualties because Rommel refused to accept that obstacles require careful preparation. The breakthrough creates chaos in French rear areas. 7th Panzer doesn't consolidate its bridgehead and wait for flanking units. It immediately exploits west, driving toward the English Channel. Rommel is now operating on instinct and opportunity rather than orders. His radio to headquarters sends only brief location updates, no requests for instructions. The division advances through the night, headlights blazing despite blackout protocol. French units scattered across the countryside see German convoys and assume they're surrounded by massive forces. The psychological effect multiplies 7th Panzer's actual strength. Company-sized roadblocks surrender to platoons. Battalion headquarters evacuate at reports of German tanks that are actually reconnaissance vehicles. The confusion is so complete that 7th Panzer earns its nickname from German headquarters, staff, frustrated by their inability to track it. The Ghost Division. It appears and disappears like a phantom, leaving destruction without clear pattern. May the 17th. 7th Panzer advances 30 miles in a single day, the fastest advance of any German formation. Rommel is personally leading the column, standing in his command vehicle, directing traffic like a policeman because his units are moving faster than staff officers can coordinate. He's not commanding division-level operations anymore. He's directing individual tank companies, pushing them forward, bypassing resistance. It's magnificent and insane. His supply columns are miles behind, struggling to find the division they're supposed to be supplying. His flanks are exposed. If French forces counterattack with any coordination, they could cut 7th Panzer off from support. But coordination requires communication, and communication requires time. And Rommel isn't giving the French time. He's collapsing French decision-making through sheer speed. By the time French commanders recognize a threat and order response, 7th Panzer has already moved. May 20th. The English Channel at Abbeville. Rommel's division reaches saltwater, completing the race to the coast. The Allied armies in Belgium are now cut off from their bases in France. The entire strategic situation has collapsed in 10 days. 7th Panzer has advanced 240 miles from the Belgian border to the sea, captured 97,648 prisoners, destroyed or captured 277 artillery pieces, and 458 tanks and armored vehicles. These aren't normal numbers. German forces don't typically capture 10 times their own strength. But Rommel has exploited confusion so effectively that French units never formed coherent defense. They encountered German armor advancing from unexpected directions and assumed catastrophic encirclement when in reality 7th Panzer was often alone, dangerously exposed, surviving through momentum and psychological dominance. The cost has been significant but manageable. 7th Panzer suffered 2,594 casualties, of which 682 were killed. For the gains achieved, these are extraordinarily light losses, but the casualty figures mask darker truths. Rommel's supply officers are pulling their hair out trying to support operations they can barely track. His division has consumed fuel at rates that can't be sustained. Several of his battalion commanders have submitted complaints about lack of coordination and dangerous exposure, and his radio discipline has been so poor that German High Command sent 14 messages demanding his location during the 6-week campaign. He responded to approximately 3 of them. This isn't initiative, this is near insubordination. It works in France because the French collapse psychologically before German logistics collapse mechanically. But it establishes patterns that will prove catastrophic when facing enemies who don't panic. June 17th, the French coastal fortress of Saint-Valery-en-Caux. This is Rommel's victory lap. The British 51st Highland Division and French 9th Corps are trapped against the coast, unable to evacuate, surrounded by German forces. Rommel personally enters the town to accept surrender from Major General Victor Fortune, the British commander. It's a dramatic scene, the German general who was torn across France in 6 weeks, accepting capitulation from a Scottish division with 200 years of military tradition. Photographers capture Rommel and Fortune in conversation, the German general magnanimous, the British general maintaining dignity in defeat. The images will become iconic, feeding the narrative that Rommel fights a clean war, respecting honorable enemies, operating according to traditional military codes. What the photographs don't show is more significant. The surrender at Saint-Valery includes 12,000 British and Imperial troops and 15,000 French soldiers. They are marched into prisoner-of-war camps where treatment divides sharply along racial lines. British officers receive correct treatment per Geneva Convention. White Commonwealth troops are similarly processed. But Indian soldiers serving with British forces face different conditions: inadequate food, primitive sanitation, racial abuse from guards. African soldiers fighting for France are separated and sent to work battalions under brutal conditions. Rommel doesn't order these discriminations. He probably doesn't even notice them, but they happen under his command, implementing racial hierarchies central to Nazi ideology. His chivalry extends only to enemies the Nazi worldview considers racially worthy of respect. This pattern will repeat throughout his career: correct treatment for British officers, brutal conditions for lesser peoples. He maintains self-image as honorable soldier while operating within a fundamentally racist system. The French campaign makes Rommel famous. German propaganda celebrates the Ghost Division. Newspapers run features on the general, who advanced faster than anyone thought possible. Hitler personally awards him the Knight's Cross and promotes him to lieutenant general. At 48 years old, Rommel has achieved the recognition he's craved since his days as an outsider at Danzig Military School. The Prussian elite can't dismiss him now. He's proven himself the finest operational commander in the Wehrmacht. But success comes with dangerous validation. Every time his aggressive tactics worked, every time speed overwhelmed defenders, every time audacity triumphed over caution, Rommel became more convinced this approach was universally applicable. The possibility that it worked in France due to specific conditions, French defensive doctrine, poor Allied coordination, limited operational depth, never occurs to him. He's discovered his genius and believes it transcends context. In less than a year, he'll test this belief in North Africa, where the conditions will be completely different. The enemy will be learning from French mistakes, and his supply lines will stretch across Mediterranean rather than across French highways. The Ghost Division's tactics will prove brilliantly adaptable to desert warfare, but the underlying assumption that speed and aggression can overcome any obstacle will lead him to disaster. For now, though, he's the hero of France, and Hitler has another mission for his most audacious general. The Italians are losing in Africa. Send Rommel, February 6, 1941. The Berghof, Hitler's mountain retreat in Bavaria. Snow falls on the Alps as the Führer stares at a map of North Africa, his fury barely contained. Benito Mussolini's African empire is collapsing. Italian forces in Libya, which numbered 236,000 men in September, have been routed by a British force less than half that size. Operation Compass, the British counteroffensive, has become the most lopsided campaign of the war. Over the past 2 months, Lieutenant General Richard O'Connor's Western Desert Force has advanced 500 miles, destroyed 10 Italian divisions, captured 130,000 prisoners, 400 tanks, and 1,200 artillery pieces, while suffering only 500 British killed. Mussolini's dreams of Mediterranean empire are dying in the Libyan sand, and Hitler faces an impossible choice. Let Italy collapse, exposing Germany's southern flank and destroying Axis credibility, or divert forces to Africa when every panzer division is needed for the planned invasion of the Soviet Union. Neither option is acceptable. So, Hitler chooses a third path: minimal commitment, maximum audacity, and the one general who might pull off the impossible. Send Rommel. The decision is improvised desperation disguised as strategy. Germany's original plan for the Mediterranean didn't include ground forces in Libya. The idea was that Italian naval power would dominate the sea, Italian armies would seize Egypt and the Suez Canal, and Germany could focus on continental Europe. Reality has demolished these assumptions. British naval forces based in Malta are savaging Italian convoys. British Commonwealth troops have revealed Italian military incompetence. And now British forces are advancing toward Tripoli, threatening to eliminate Axis presence in North Africa entirely. Hitler can't allow this without appearing weak, but he also can't afford a major commitment. The solution is to send a blocking force, small enough to be expendable, large enough to stabilize the situation, led by someone brilliant or lucky enough to achieve results beyond reasonable expectation. Rommel fits perfectly. He's proven his ability to do the impossible with minimal resources. He ignores logistics in favor of aggressive action. And if he fails in Africa, it's far from the crucial theaters. February 12, Rommel receives his orders with just 3 days' notice. He's to take command of German forces being sent to Libya, the 5,053rd Light Division, to be renamed the 5th Light Division, consisting of approximately 8,500 men, 155 tanks, and support units. His mission is explicitly defensive: reach Tripoli, stabilize the front, prevent further Italian collapse, and await reinforcements before considering any offensive operations. The orders couldn't be clearer. Hold, do not advance, do not engage unless necessary, preserve your force. Rommel listens to these instructions with the same enthusiasm he showed for staying with headquarters elements in France, which is to say, none at all. He's already planning offensive operations before his aircraft leaves Germany. His staff officers, knowing his reputation, start preparing for a campaign that officially isn't supposed to happen. February 14, Tripoli, Libya. Rommel arrives in North Africa to find a situation even worse than Berlin described. Italian morale has collapsed. Soldiers are selling equipment to Arab traders for food. Officers speak openly of inevitable defeat. The British are still 150 miles away at El Agheila, apparently pausing to reorganize after their rapid advance. But forward elements could reach Tripoli in days if they push. The port itself is chaos. Bombed-out facilities, inadequate unloading capacity, no organized system for receiving supplies. Rommel's forces will arrive by ship over the next 3 weeks. The British could attack before German forces are even assembled. Standard military practice is to establish defensive positions, wait until full strength, prepare proper logistics, then consider next steps. But standard practice assumes the enemy will allow time for preparation. Rommel's instinct says otherwise. If the British realize how weak his forces are, they will attack immediately and win easily. His only chance is to appear stronger than he is, aggressive rather than defensive, ready to counterattack rather than absorbing blows. He immediately begins an elaborate deception campaign. The few tanks that have arrived are driven back and forth through Tripoli streets where British reconnaissance aircraft can photograph them, creating impression of massive armored presence. Wooden frames covered with canvas are mounted on Volkswagen Kübelwagens, creating fake tanks that look real from the air. German units are ordered to light excessive numbers of campfires at night, simulating battalion strength with company-sized forces. Radio traffic is deliberately increased, with operators sending dummy messages to non-existent units. Within a week, British intelligence is reporting German tank strength in Tripoli as 3 times actual numbers. The deception works so well it fools German high command too. When Rommel requests permission to advance once his full division arrives, the response from Berlin is incredulous. Absolutely not. Your force is too small for offensive operations. Maintain defensive posture until 15th Panzer Division arrives in May. Rommel's response is to ignore these orders entirely. By late February, reconnaissance elements of 5th Light Division have reached the front near Sirte, halfway between Tripoli and the British positions at El Agheila. His orders are to conduct reconnaissance only. Instead, on February 24th, he orders a limited advance to test British strength. The reconnaissance turns into an attack that pushes British forces back from Mughta. Rommel has now directly violated explicit orders, engaged in offensive action he was specifically forbidden to attempt, and set in motion exactly the kind of campaign German High Command wanted to prevent. When Berlin demands explanation, Rommel provides brilliant tactical rationalization. The British were probing his positions. He had to counterattack to prevent them from discovering his weakness. The advance was purely defensive in purpose. It's technically true and fundamentally dishonest. He's maneuvering toward an offensive he knows he's not supposed to launch. March. His deception campaign intensifies. Beyond fake tanks and inflated radio traffic, Rommel has discovered that the desert itself can be weaponized for psychological warfare. He orders truck columns to drive in circles behind German lines, their wheels kicking up massive dust clouds visible for miles. From British observation posts, these dust clouds look like major troop movements, entire divisions maneuvering into attack positions. British intelligence officers, still traumatized by the speed of French collapse, interpret every indicator as possible blitzkrieg preparation. They don't know that German forces consist of approximately 12,000 men, most still arriving by ship, with minimal fuel reserves and supply lines stretching 1,400 miles back to Naples. They see dust clouds and fake tanks and increased radio traffic, and they calculate that Rommel commands perhaps 20 to 30,000 troops with full logistics backing. The actual ratio is less than half that. But perception is reality in warfare, and Rommel has made the British perceive a threat far beyond what he can actually deliver. March 24. A meeting between Rommel and Italian General Italo Garibaldi, nominally his superior, as commander of all Axis forces in North Africa. Garibaldi has received the same orders from Rome that Rommel received from Berlin. Absolutely no offensive operations until reinforced. Garibaldi lectures Rommel on the need for patience, proper preparation, coordinated planning with Italian units. Rommel nods, makes agreeable sounds, and privately decides that Italian command structure is irrelevant to his planning. He's already conducted reconnaissance of British positions at El Agheila. He's identified weak points in their defense, and he's calculated, correctly, that the British pause is due to logistics, not strength. O'Connor's spectacular advance consumed fuel and ammunition faster than supply could keep up. British forces are scattered, extended, probably under strength. This is exactly the kind of situation where Rommel's tactics excel. Enemies who expect defensive posture, who underestimate German strength, who need time to prepare that he won't give them. March 31st. Without authorization from Berlin, without coordination with Italian command, without adequate fuel reserves or logistics preparation, Rommel launches his offensive. 5th Light Division attacks El Agheila at dawn, catching British forces in mid-reorganization. The British expected at least another month before any German offensive. They've been rotating units, sending exhausted formations back to Egypt, bringing up fresh but inexperienced replacements. Rommel hits them at the precise moment of maximum vulnerability. El Agheila falls in hours. Instead of consolidating, Rommel orders immediate exploitation. His division advances 50 miles the first day. The pattern that worked in France repeats in Africa. Speed creating confusion, confusion creating panic, panic creating collapse. British commanders lose track of their own units, issue contradictory orders, retreat when they might successfully defend. Within 3 days, Rommel has recaptured all the territory Italy lost over the previous 4 months. Within 12 days, he's advanced 400 miles and surrounded the port fortress of Tobruk. German High Command is simultaneously thrilled and appalled. They've been handed an unexpected victory by a general who completely ignored his orders to achieve it. But the victory contains the seeds of future disaster. Rommel has advanced so far, so fast, that his supply situation is desperate. Fuel is being rationed on a day-to-day basis. Ammunition resupply depends on trucks driving 1,400 miles from Tripoli. Every mile forward is a mile that supplies must travel to reach him. Every German soldier in North Africa requires 6 times the supply tonnage of a soldier in France, because everything, food, water, fuel, ammunition, spare parts, must come by ship across a Mediterranean under constant British air and naval attack, then by truck across endless desert. Rommel has reproduced his Ghost Division tactics without accounting for the completely different logistics reality. In France, his division advanced through territory with existing infrastructure, roads, railways, supply depots. In Libya, there's sand and more sand. Nothing grows, nothing exists locally. Everything must come from Europe. The mathematics are brutal and inflexible. The farther he advances, the weaker he becomes. April 14, Tobruk, the fortress that will haunt Rommel for 8 months. He attacks immediately, expecting the same collapse that British forces showed everywhere else. But Tobruk is different. The garrison of 36,000 troops, primarily the Australian 9th Division, has spent months fortifying positions. They have supplies for extended siege, delivered by Royal Navy destroyers running the gauntlet from Alexandria, and they have orders to hold at all costs. Rommel's assault fails. He tries again. It fails again. Each attack consumes fuel and ammunition he can't replace, casualties he can't afford, time that allows British forces to reorganize. By late April, he's forced to admit that Tobruk won't fall quickly. He should probably withdraw, consolidate, build up supplies for another campaign. Instead, he orders siege operations while simultaneously maintaining offensive posture along the Egyptian frontier. He's now committed to 2 contradictory missions, investing Tobruk and defending against British counterattacks, with forces barely adequate for one. His supply situation deteriorates daily. His commanders are reporting critical shortages, and German High Command is sending increasingly angry messages demanding he stop advancing and sort out his logistics. Rommel ignores them all. He's won. He's reversed an impossible situation. He's achieved operational miracle through pure audacity. The fact that he's now dangerously overextended seems like a temporary problem that more audacity can solve. It's the French campaign all over again, except this time the enemy isn't collapsing. The supply lines aren't measured in hundreds of kilometers across friendly territory, but thousands across hostile sea and empty desert. And the British are learning from their mistakes. But Rommel doesn't see these differences. He sees only that his methods worked again. They always work, until they don't. April 8, 1941. A dusty road junction in the Libyan desert, 50 miles south of Tobruk. Lieutenant General Philip Neame and Major General Richard O'Connor are riding in a staff car through pre-dawn darkness, trying to reach British positions before German forces cut them off. Neame commands all British forces in Cyrenaica. O'Connor, the architect of the brilliant campaign that destroyed 10 Italian divisions, was visiting from Cairo as an advisor. Now, they're both fleeing the collapse of their entire defensive front, trying to make sense of a catastrophe neither saw coming. Their driver misses a turn in the darkness. The car becomes lost on unmarked desert tracks. At 5:30 a.m., they crest a rise and find themselves staring at German soldiers. A patrol from Rommel's reconnaissance battalion has set up a roadblock, expecting to catch retreating British supply trucks. Instead, they've captured 2 British generals in a single ambush. It's a piece of extraordinary luck that exemplifies the chaos consuming British forces across Libya. The entire command structure is disintegrating. The double capture sends shockwaves through British command. Losing Neame is bad enough. He's the ground commander responsible for defending Cyrenaica against exactly this kind of attack. But losing O'Connor is catastrophic in ways beyond pure military rank. O'Connor understands desert warfare better than any British officer. His Lightning campaign that destroyed Italian forces used exactly the kind of mobile, aggressive tactics that Rommel is now employing against the British. He knows how to defend against what he himself pioneered. His presence might have stabilized the collapsing British defense. Instead, he's in a German prisoner cage, and his captors can't quite believe their fortune. Rommel personally interrogates both generals, mining them for intelligence about British dispositions. The conversation is cordial, correct, professional. Rommel treats them as honored opponents rather than defeated enemies. The famous chivalry is on display, but underneath the courtesy lies cold calculation. Every hour these generals remain captured is an hour British forces remain decapitated, disorganized, unable to mount effective resistance. The psychological impact extends beyond missing commanders. British troops across Cyrenaica are receiving reports that Germans are everywhere, behind them, flanking them, cutting supply lines. The reports are half true. Rommel's forces aren't nearly as numerous or omnipresent as panicked radio messages suggest. But in war, perception creates reality. British units that could successfully defend if they stood and fought instead withdraw precipitously, abandoning equipment, racing toward Egypt. Entire battalions disintegrate. Supply dumps are evacuated or destroyed. Artillery is spiked and left behind. By mid-April, the spectacular advance that cost O'Connor 4 months to achieve has been reversed in 12 days. Rommel has recaptured Cyrenaica, invested Tobruk, and pushed British forces back to the Egyptian frontier, all with a force that shouldn't theoretically have been capable of offensive operations at all. German propaganda doesn't miss the opportunity. This unknown general who violated orders to achieve impossible victory becomes an overnight sensation, but it's British propaganda that creates the defining nickname. In early July 1941, the Daily Express, a London newspaper, runs an article by its correspondent Philip Jordan titled "The Desert Fox." The piece describes Rommel's tactics in admiring terms: cunning, elusive, striking from unexpected directions, vanishing before counterattacks can catch him. The fox metaphor perfectly captures both his operational style and something the British public desperately needs: a worthy opponent. If Germany's commander in Africa is brilliant, then British defeats are honorable rather than humiliating. If he's a genius, then British soldiers aren't losing to a superior system, but to an extraordinary individual. The nickname spreads through British ranks faster than through German. Within weeks, captured British soldiers are asking German guards if they have seen the fox. British officers refer to him casually as though he were a character from a novel. The psychological operation backfires spectacularly. British commanders recognize the danger but can't stop it. General Claude Auchinleck, who replaced Wavell as Middle East commander in July 1941, sends a memo to all units explicitly forbidding troops from referring to Rommel by nickname. There exists a real danger that our friend Rommel is becoming a kind of magician or bogeyman to our troops, Auchinleck writes. He is by no means a Superman, although he is undoubtedly very energetic and able. Even if he were a Superman, it would still be highly undesirable that our men should credit him with supernatural powers. The memo is militarily sound and psychologically futile. Soldiers don't stop believing in Rommel's abilities because a general tells them to. Every British defeat reinforces the myth. Every time Rommel appears where he's not expected, the legend grows. By autumn 1941, German propaganda has adopted the British nickname. Rommel himself is uncomfortable with it initially, but accepts it when Hitler expresses approval. The Führer understands propaganda value even if Rommel doesn't. June 15, 1941. Operation Battle Axe. The British attempt to relieve Tobruk and destroy Rommel's forces. General Wavell, under intense pressure from Churchill to attack, launches a 3-day offensive with 91 tanks of the 7th Armored Division. The operation is supposed to exploit British advantages in numbers and equipment. Instead, it becomes a masterclass in defensive warfare that cements Rommel's growing reputation. He's positioned his forces along the Egyptian frontier in a deep defensive zone rather than a linear front. British tanks, advancing to engage what they expect are forward German positions, discover they've driven into a killing zone. German 88mm anti-aircraft guns, repurposed as anti-tank weapons, are positioned in camouflage positions with clear fields of fire. British cruiser tanks, fast but lightly armored, are massacred at ranges where they can't effectively return fire. The genius of Rommel's defensive arrangement is that it turns British aggression into vulnerability. The more decisively British armor pushes forward seeking decisive engagement, the more exposed they become to German anti-tank positions they can't identify until too late. British tank commanders are trained to close with enemy armor for mobile engagement. But Rommel doesn't fight the way British doctrine expects. He uses mobile forces to draw British tanks into positions where German guns can destroy them. It's tactical sophistication beyond what British commanders have encountered. Over 3 days, Operation Battleaxe loses 91 tanks, essentially the entire attacking force, while destroying only 12 German tanks. The ratio is humiliating. Churchill, furious at the failure, replaces Wavell with Auchinleck. But replacing commanders doesn't solve the fundamental problem. Rommel is outthinking British operational doctrine. The defeat has strategic consequences beyond immediate casualties. It gives Rommel 5 months to consolidate his positions, integrate reinforcements, and prepare for the next British offensive. More importantly, it validates his tactical approach. The same aggressive mobile style that worked in France works in Africa. The same exploitation of enemy assumptions, the same creation of chaos through unexpected action, the same psychological dominance of a battlefield through audacity. He's now convinced that his methods are universally applicable, that any enemy can be defeated through speed and surprise and will. The possibility that he succeeded in Battleaxe because British tactics were predictable, because Commonwealth tanks were mechanically unreliable, because his defensive positions exploited specific advantages of the terrain and equipment. These contextual factors don't register. He sees only that he won. Again. As always. Therefore, his approach must be correct. July 1941. The Siege of Tobruk continues through summer heat that reaches 50 degrees Celsius in the shade. Australian troops hold the fortress perimeter, conducting aggressive night patrols that make German siege operations a constant nightmare. Rommel tries multiple assaults, each consuming troops and supplies he can't replace. Every failure costs him credibility with German high command, which is increasingly frustrated by his inability to take a fortress he claimed would fall quickly. The Australian 9th Division is proving much harder to dislodge than anyone expected. They're veterans now, adapted to desert conditions, masters of night fighting and infiltration tactics that disrupt German positions. Rommel's forces are learning what the British learned earlier. Taking fortified positions requires methodical preparation, overwhelming firepower, and patience. All things Rommel lacks. His strength is mobile warfare, exploitation of breakthroughs, operational movement. Tobruk is none of these things. It's static, grinding, attritional combat that plays to none of his advantages. By autumn, Rommel's situation is deteriorating in ways his public reputation doesn't reflect. He's famous now. German newspapers run regular features. Hitler mentions him in speeches. International press covers his campaigns. But fame doesn't deliver fuel or ammunition. His supply situation is desperate. Italian convoys crossing the Mediterranean are being savaged by British submarines and aircraft operating from Malta. In October 1941, 63% of supplies shipped from Italy fail to reach Libya. Ships are sunk, cargo goes to the bottom of the Mediterranean, and Rommel's tanks sit immobile for lack of fuel. His forces need 50,000 tons of supplies monthly to maintain operations. They're receiving an average of 27,000. The deficit accumulates daily, like bleeding from a wound that won't close. Every operation consumes irreplaceable reserves. Every battle draws down stockpiles that can't be replenished. And British forces in Egypt are growing stronger, preparing for counter-offensive, building up overwhelming material advantage. November 18, 1941. Operation Crusader begins. The British are coming with 750 tanks against Rommel's 260, nearly 3-to-1 odds. Auchinleck has learned from Battleaxe. This offensive is carefully planned, well supplied, and aimed at destroying German armor in a battle of attrition where British material advantages become decisive. Rommel's reputation is about to face its first serious test. Can his tactical brilliance overcome this kind of material disadvantage? Can speed and aggression substitute for fuel reserves and replacement tanks? Can willpower overcome logistics? The myth suggests yes. The The mathematics suggest no. Over the next 3 weeks, North Africa will discover which is correct. And the man British propaganda elevated to Superman status will reveal limitations that propaganda carefully obscured. The desert fox is about to be caught in a trap he can't charm his way out of. For the first time since France, Rommel will face an enemy that doesn't panic, that has learned from previous defeats, that possesses both material superiority and competent leadership. His tactical genius is about to collide with strategic reality. The collision won't be kind. November 23, 1941. Somewhere in the Libyan desert southeast of Tobruk, Rommel's staff officers have lost contact with their commanding general. Again, he departed headquarters 36 hours ago in his command vehicle, leading what he called a reconnaissance in force toward the Egyptian frontier. What started as reconnaissance has transformed into a full-scale armored raid, the dash to the wire, as it will be called, and now the entire Africa Corps command structure is operating blind. Major General Alfred Gauss, Rommel's chief of staff, stares at the situation map in mounting panic. British Operation Crusader has been underway for 5 days. 750 British tanks are attempting to destroy German armor and relieve Tobruk. The battle is scattered across 2,000 square miles of desert, with armored formations clashing in dust storms that reduce visibility to meters. German forces need careful coordination, clear communication, concentrated strength. Instead, their commander has driven off toward Egypt with 100 tanks, leaving his remaining forces without direction at the crisis point of the battle. Lieutenant Colonel Siegfried Westphal, operations officer, tries again to raise Rommel on the radio. Static and silence. He turns to Gauss with barely controlled fury. The Herr General has taken leave of his senses. The British are attempting to link up with Tobruk garrison. Our defensive positions at Sidi Rezegh are under attack from 2 directions. We need him here to coordinate response, and he's driving around the Egyptian frontier, playing at being a tank commander. Gauss has no response because Westphal is right. Rommel has abandoned command responsibilities to personally lead a raid that, in his mind, will create chaos in British rear areas and force them to break off their offensive. But chaos cuts both ways. While Rommel creates confusion among British supply units on the frontier, his own forces are fragmenting without unified command. The raid demonstrates both his tactical brilliance and his fundamental unsuitability for higher command. He's thinking like a battalion commander when he needs to think like an army commander. The dash to the wire is Rommel at his most characteristically reckless. His reasoning is sound by his own tactical logic. British offensive depends on supplies and reinforcements coming from Egypt. If he can cut these supply lines, the offensive collapses regardless of immediate battlefield situation. So, he's taken a substantial portion of German armor, 100 of his 260 available tanks, and driven 75 miles behind British lines toward the Egyptian frontier, scattering rear area formations, destroying supply dumps, creating impression of catastrophic encirclement. British commanders, receiving panicked reports from rear areas, initially fear their entire offensive has been cut off. Some units begin retreating toward Egypt. The raid is achieving exactly the psychological effect Rommel intended, but effect and reality are diverging catastrophically. While Rommel chases supply trucks near the Egyptian border, the main British armored thrust is crushing German defensive positions at Sidi Rezegh, the key terrain controlling access to Tobruk. November 24th. Sidi Rezegh is falling. German forces defending the ridge are being overwhelmed by British armor attacking from multiple directions. The Tobruk garrison is breaking out of the fortress perimeter, attempting to link up with relieving forces. If this junction succeeds, Tobruk is relieved. The 8-month siege is broken, and Rommel's entire position in Cyrenaica becomes untenable. This is the decisive moment of the campaign, requiring immediate commitment of German reserves and aggressive counterattack. But German reserves are 75 miles away, commanded by a general who can't be contacted because he's personally leading tank charges against British supply columns. Westphal makes the decision Rommel should be making. Pull back from Sidi Rezegh, consolidate forces, prepare defensive positions. It's sound judgment that probably saves the Africa Corps from destruction. But it also means abandoning the key terrain and ceding initiative to British forces. When Rommel finally returns to headquarters on November 27th, having achieved spectacular tactical results against secondary targets, he discovers the strategic situation has collapsed while he was gone. His response reveals the emotional volatility that his admirers ignore and his staff officers endure daily. Rommel explodes at his subordinates for abandoning Sidi Rezeg, accusing them of cowardice and defeatism. Gauss tries to explain the impossibility of holding the position without reserves or direction. Rommel won't hear it. He insists his raid was succeeding, that British forces were on verge of collapse, that one more day would have completed their disintegration. His staff officers exchange exhausted glances. They've seen this pattern before. Rommel fixates on what's happening in his immediate vicinity and assumes it represents the entire battlefield. Because British supply units were panicking where he was, he believes all British forces were panicking. Because his raid felt successful, it must have been strategically significant. The possibility that he was achieving tactical effects while losing strategic position simply doesn't compute. He can't process that both things are simultaneously true. His raid worked brilliantly, and it didn't matter. December 1st. The reality that Rommel can't accept is forcing itself upon him through brute facts. British armor has linked up with Tobruk garrison. The siege is broken. German forces at Sidi Rezeg have been forced back with heavy losses. Tobruk can now be supplied and reinforced by land, rather than depending on nightly destroyer runs. More critically, Rommel's armor has been shattered. Of the 260 tanks he began Operation Crusader with, only 90 remain operational. Some were destroyed in combat. More broke down from mechanical failure, exacerbated by lack of spare parts. His supply situation has gone from desperate to catastrophic. Fuel reserves are measured in days rather than weeks. Ammunition is rationed. And British forces, though also badly mauled, can replace their losses. Ships arriving in Alexandria bring replacement tanks, fresh troops, stockpiled supplies. Nothing is arriving in Tripoli except empty promises from Rome and Berlin. The mathematics of attrition are brutal and undeniable. Rommel is fighting 700 miles from his main supply port, dependent on convoys that are being systematically destroyed by Royal Navy forces based in Malta. Every tank lost represents an irreplaceable asset. Every gallon of fuel consumed cannot be replaced at current delivery rates. He's in a position where the British can trade losses at 2-to-1 or even 3-to-1 ratios and still win through sheer accumulation of advantage. His only hope was to achieve decisive victory quickly, destroying British offensive capability before attrition mechanics ground his force down. Instead, he chased supply trucks, while the battle that mattered happened elsewhere. Now, he's lost the initiative, lost his numerical balance, lost Tobruk, and lost credibility with German high command. For the first time in his career, Rommel must conduct a fighting retreat. His entire identity is built on aggressive advance. Now, he must admit defeat and withdraw. It's psychologically devastating. December 7. Rommel receives authorization to abandon the Siege of Tobruk and withdraw to defensive positions. The order comes as relief mixed with humiliation. He's been arguing for days that with just a few more tanks, a little more fuel, one more offensive push, he could still achieve victory. German high command has stopped believing him. The operational reports from his own staff officers contradict his optimistic assessments. They describe an army on the edge of collapse, held together by professional competence of junior officers and NCOs, despite rather than because of their commanding general's decisions. The Africa Corps has suffered 33,000 casualties, 13,000 Germans killed or wounded, 20,000 Italians captured. British losses are comparable in numbers, but not in replaceability. Auchinleck can rebuild, Rommel cannot. The withdrawal begins in stages. German rearguards conducting professional delaying actions, while main forces retreat toward Gazala, then Benghazi, then back toward the starting positions of April. The retreat reveals patterns that will characterize the rest of the North African campaign. Rommel preserves his German forces ruthlessly, sacrificing Italian units to buy time. At multiple points during the withdrawal, Italian infantry divisions find themselves abandoned without transport, left to surrender or die while German motorized units race westward. The official explanation is military necessity. Limited trucks must carry the most valuable troops. The reality is calculated ethnic prioritization. German soldiers are worth saving. Italian soldiers are expendable. This isn't Rommel's policy specifically, it's standard Wehrmacht practice, reflecting Nazi racial hierarchies. But Rommel implements it without apparent qualms. His famous chivalry, so evident in dealings with British officers, doesn't extend to Allied Italian forces. They're viewed as militarily incompetent, racially inferior, politically unreliable. When forced to choose between saving Germans and saving Italians, there's no choice at all. January 28, 1942. Rommel withdraws from Tripoli, his last major position in Libya. He's retreated 300 miles in 8 weeks, abandoning all the territory his April offensive captured. British forces reoccupy Benghazi, Derna, and the Cyrenaican highlands. The Africa Corps is intact, but exhausted, down to fewer than 100 operational tanks, critically short of every category of supply. Rommel has salvaged his force from destruction, but lost every strategic objective he gained. The 8-month campaign has returned him essentially to his starting point, minus 33,000 casualties he cannot replace. German High Command is reassessing whether the North African theater is worth continued investment. Hitler is furious that his famous general has been defeated. Mussolini is humiliated that German forces couldn't protect Italian territory, and Rommel is discovering something he's never experienced before: the taste of failure. His response is revealing and troubling. Rather than accept responsibility for the disaster, Rommel blames everyone except himself. His after-action reports fault Italian troops for cowardice, German High Command for inadequate support, the Luftwaffe for failing to protect supply convoys, the Kriegsmarine for not interdicting British supplies. The possibility that his operational decisions, the dash to the wire, the obsession with Tobruk, the refusal to consolidate before attacking, contributed to defeat doesn't appear in his analysis. This pattern of deflecting responsibility will repeat throughout his career. When operations succeed, Rommel takes full credit. When they fail, subordinates are blamed, logistics are blamed, higher command is blamed, allies are blamed. It's human nature, perhaps, but it's also dangerous self-deception. Commanders who can't honestly assess their failures can't learn from them. Rommel isn't learning, he's rationalizing. Yet something has shifted in him during this retreat. His letters to Lucy, normally confident and optimistic, carry new tones of doubt. He mentions for the first time that perhaps the war cannot be won, that Germany's strategic situation is deteriorating, that Hitler's decisions are questionable. These are dangerous thoughts for a German general in 1942, and Rommel is careful not to express them anywhere except private correspondence. But they're present, seeds of disillusionment that will grow over the next 2 years. The Rommel who enters 1942 is not quite the same officer who violated orders to launch his April offensive. He's still tactically brilliant, still personally courageous, still capable of achieving remarkable results with limited forces. But he's also been humbled, forced to confront limitations, exposed to the reality that will and audacity cannot overcome material disadvantage indefinitely. The question is whether this humbling will make him more careful or more desperate. The answer will come in 6 months at a place called Gazala, where Rommel will stake everything on one last offensive and achieve his greatest victory, which will set up his ultimate defeat. May 26, 1942, 4:30 in the afternoon, south of Gazala, Libya. The greatest armored battle ever fought in North Africa erupts in the desert as Rommel personally leads 332 German tanks around the southern end of British defensive lines. This attack should not be happening. German High Command ordered Rommel to wait for Italian infantry divisions to complete their buildup before launching any offensive. Mussolini himself insisted on coordinated Axis assault, with Italian forces playing equal role to German. Rommel nodded at these instructions the way he always does, with apparent agreement and complete disregard. He's attacking now because his intelligence report suggests British armor is dispersed, because his fuel reserves are adequate for rapid campaign, and because waiting gives the enemy time to strengthen positions. Also, he's impatient. 8 months have passed since the humiliation of his retreat. 8 months of careful rebuilding, supply accumulation, and tactical preparation. He's ready to prove that Operation Crusader was an aberration, that his methods work, that he's still the most dangerous operational commander in the Wehrmacht. The plan is vintage Rommel. Aggressive, risky, dependent on speed and enemy confusion. British forces have constructed the Gazala Line, a 40-mile belt of fortified positions running from the Mediterranean coast south into the desert, anchored by minefields and mutually supporting strongpoints. Frontally assaulting these positions would be suicidal. So, Rommel isn't attacking frontally. He's taking his entire armored force, the 15th and 21st Panzer Divisions, plus the Italian Ariete Armored Division, around the southern end of British positions, planning to sweep north behind their lines, cut supply routes, and force British armor into a meeting engagement where German tactical superiority can compensate for numerical disadvantage. It's audacious to the point of madness. His tanks will be operating with their backs to British minefields, supplied through a narrow corridor that British forces can cut at any time. If the British react quickly and decisively, they can trap Rommel's entire armored force against their own fortifications and destroy it. The plan requires British confusion, hesitation, and poor coordination. Rommel is betting his entire army that the British will provide all three. May 27th, dawn. The first day's fighting shatters Rommel's assumptions. British armor doesn't collapse in confusion. Instead, multiple tank brigades engage German forces in rolling battles across the desert. The fighting is close, brutal, and inconclusive. Rommel personally directs tank battles from his command vehicle, exposing himself to fire repeatedly, earning devotion from his troops and heart attacks from his staff officers. By evening, he's destroyed significant British armor, but at heavy cost to his own forces. Worse, he's trapped. British minefields are behind him. British armor is in front and on his flanks. His supply trucks cannot reach him through the narrow corridor he drove through, and he's consuming fuel and ammunition faster than can be replaced. His officers are reporting critical shortages. Some units are down to final ammunition loads. Tank commanders are requesting permission to withdraw. Rommel refuses. Withdrawing means admitting the offensive has failed. He's committed everything to this attack. It must succeed. May 28th. The situation deteriorates further. Rommel's position is now called the Cauldron. He's in a natural depression surrounded by British forces, his back to their minefields, running out of supplies. His staff officers are begging him to retreat while escape corridors still exist. Colonel Fritz Bayerlein, his chief of staff, presents calculations showing the force will be immobile within 48 hours if supply situation doesn't improve. Rommel responds with decision that reveals his character at its most complex. He orders his engineers to blow gaps through the British minefields behind him, creating supply routes through the enemy's own defensive barriers. It's militarily insane and tactically brilliant. The British built these minefields facing outward, expecting to defend against attacks from the west. Rommel will breach them from the east, using enemy obstacles as cover for his supply lines. The plan requires his forces to hold the Cauldron against British attacks, while engineers work under fire to clear mines. Any coordinated British assault should overwhelm his position. But coordination requires communication, decision-making, and unity of command. All things the British are struggling with. June 1st, the Cauldron still holds. For 5 days, Rommel's forces have defended a perimeter that should have been overrun within hours. They've done this through tactical superiority that goes beyond Rommel's personal decisions. German combined arms doctrine integrates tanks, anti-tank guns, artillery, and infantry in mutually supporting roles. British forces still largely operate in single-arm formations, sending tanks forward unsupported by artillery or infantry, exposing them to German 88mm anti-tank guns that destroy British armor at ranges where British tanks cannot effectively return fire. The technological and doctrinal gap is significant. German tanks are individually inferior to British, slower, less reliable, often less well-armored. But German tactical employment is vastly superior. They fight as coordinated teams. British forces fight as individual units pursuing separate objectives. The difference is decisive. June 13th, Operation Aberdeen, the British attempt to destroy Rommel's position in the Cauldron, collapses in disaster. The British attack with 230 tanks, expecting to overwhelm the surrounded German forces through sheer numbers. Instead, they drive into carefully prepared killing zones where German anti-tank guns and dug-in panzers massacre British armor. Within hours, the British lose 138 tanks. Rommel immediately counterattacks, his forces breaking out of the Cauldron and pursuing retreating British units. The Knightsbridge Box, a critical British strongpoint, falls on June 14th. The entire Gazala line begins unraveling. British forces that thought they had Rommel trapped discover they're the ones being encircled. Within 3 days, the situation has reversed completely. Rommel is advancing, the British are retreating, and Tobruk, the fortress that resisted siege for 8 months in 1941, suddenly stands exposed and isolated. June 21, 8:30 in the morning, Tobruk falls. The garrison of 35,000 troops surrenders after less than 12 hours of fighting. Rommel's forces breach the perimeter at dawn, his tanks racing through defensive positions that held for months in 1941. The difference isn't that the defenses are weaker or the attackers more numerous. The difference is that in 1941, Tobruk was held by Australian veterans who believed the position could and should be defended. In 1942, it's held by South African forces whose commanders never believed Tobruk was defensible after Gazala Line collapsed. Belief matters in war. Troops who expect to be defeated often are. The South African garrison, already demoralized by the speed of German advance, breaks quickly once the perimeter is penetrated. By noon, German and Italian forces are in the town center. By evening, it's over. Rommel accepts formal surrender and immediately begins exploiting the captured supplies. The booty is extraordinary. 2,000 vehicles, 5,000 tons of rations, 2,000 tons of fuel, massive ammunition stocks. For a force operating at end of 1,400-mile supply line, capturing an enemy supply depot is better than victory in battle. The fuel alone enables Rommel to continue offensive operations he otherwise couldn't sustain. The supplies let him feed his troops without waiting for convoys from Tripoli. Most importantly, the psychological impact is devastating to British morale and intoxicating to German. Rommel has captured in a single day what he failed to take in 8 months of siege. German propaganda celebrates it as vindication, proof that Rommel's genius overcomes any obstacle. Hitler promotes him to Field Marshal at age 50, the youngest in the German army. Mussolini promises Rommel will ride a white horse into Cairo within weeks. The Führer awards him the diamonds to his Knight's Cross, Germany's highest military honor. At this moment, Rommel is the most famous general in the world, celebrated even by enemies as a military genius who wins through brilliance rather than brutality. But the victory is strategically meaningless, and several of Rommel's own officers recognize this immediately. Capturing Tobruk doesn't change the fundamental reality of North African theater. Germany cannot logistically support sustained operations deep into Egypt. Every mile advanced is a mile that supplies must travel. The fuel captured at Tobruk will be consumed within weeks. The vehicles will break down from desert conditions faster than they can be replaced, and British forces, though defeated tactically, are withdrawing into Egypt, where their supply lines shorten while Rommel's lengthen catastrophically. The rational decision is to consolidate at Tobruk, stockpile supplies, prepare defensive positions, and let the British attack into prepared positions where German tactical superiority can compensate for material disadvantage. Several staff officers recommend exactly this. Rommel dismisses them all. He's won the greatest victory of his career. Momentum is with him. British forces are shattered and demoralized. This is the moment to exploit, to pursue, to destroy enemy completely before they can recover. June 23. Rommel violates explicit orders from German high command and continues advancing into Egypt. The orders are unambiguous: halt at the Libyan-Egyptian border, consolidate captured territory, prepare defensive positions. Rommel responds that these orders are based on outdated understanding of the situation, that British forces are on verge of complete collapse, that one more push will reach the Nile Delta and end British presence in North Africa entirely. He's partly right. British forces are disorganized, demoralized, conducting fighting withdrawal rather than coherent defense. But he's also repeating the exact mistake that led to disaster in Operation Crusader. Assuming tactical success represents strategic opportunity, that enemy confusion is permanent rather than temporary, that momentum can substitute for logistics. His supply situation is already precarious. The fuel from Tobruk lets him advance maybe 300 miles. Then what? The answer is unclear, but Rommel isn't asking the question. He's achieved his greatest victory. Hitler has made him youngest field marshal. The world is celebrating his genius. How can he stop now? July 1st. First Battle of El Alamein begins. Rommel has advanced to within 60 miles of Alexandria, 100 miles from Cairo. His leading elements can see the pyramids on clear days. British forces are defending from hastily prepared positions along a 40-mile front between the Mediterranean and the Qattara Depression. An impassable salt marsh. This is the last defensible position before the Nile Delta. If Rommel breaks through here, Egypt falls, the Suez Canal is lost. British position in Middle East collapses. Everything depends on stopping him. British commander is General Claude Auchinleck, who has taken personal command after firing his army commander for losing Gazala. Auchinleck understands what many British commanders have not. Rommel's forces are exhausted, undersupplied, operating at end of impossible logistics tale. They can be defeated through attrition if British forces refuse to panic, maintain positions, and force Rommel to attack prepared defenses repeatedly. Auchinleck doesn't need to win spectacular victory. He just needs to not lose catastrophically. The attacks fail. Again and again, Rommel probes British positions, seeking weak points that don't exist. His armor bounces off defensive positions. His infantry takes casualties without achieving breakthroughs. The fuel situation becomes critical. Tanks are immobilized not from battle damage, but from empty tanks. Artillery falls silent for lack of ammunition. Medical supplies run short. And British forces aren't collapsing. They're fighting coherently, withdrawing from threatened positions before being cut off, counterattacking German penetrations before they can be exploited. For the first time, Rommel is facing enemy that has learned from previous defeats, that isn't giving him the confusion and panic his tactics exploit. He's being forced to fight the kind of battle he's least equipped for. Methodical, attritional, logistically dependent. It's a battle he cannot win. But acknowledging this requires acknowledging that Gazala and Tobruk, his greatest victories, have led him into a strategic dead end. The triumph that made him field marshal has destroyed his army. August 15, 1942. The port of Tobruk, now in German hands but operating at fraction of its capacity. A German quartermaster officer, Major Friedrich Müller, stands on the damaged quay watching an Italian freighter burn offshore. British bombers struck the convoy last night, sinking 3 supply ships before they could unload. The 4th ship made it to harbor this morning, but hit a mine left by British engineers during their evacuation. Müller watches smoke rise and does mathematics that spell doom. The Africa Corps requires 50,000 tons of supplies monthly to maintain current strength and operational capability. In July, 27,000 tons arrived. In August, they'll be lucky to receive 20,000. The deficit accumulates like compound interest. Every shortfall means next month's operations consume reserves that can't be replaced. Müller reports these figures to Rommel daily. Rommel acknowledges them and continues planning offensive operations as though logistics can be solved through force of will. They can't. The numbers are brutal and non-negotiable. A single German panzer division in North Africa consumes approximately 400 tons of supplies daily. Fuel, ammunition, water, food, medical supplies, spare parts. Rommel commands 2 panzer divisions plus multiple infantry divisions, Italian forces, and various supporting units. Total requirement: 1,500 tons daily, 45,000 monthly, minimum. The journey from Europe to North Africa requires ships to cross the Mediterranean, historically dominated by British naval power based in Malta and Alexandria. Every convoy faces attack from submarines, destroyers, and aircraft. The percentages are devastating. In July 1942, 41% of all cargo shipped to Libya is sunk before arrival. The ships that survive must unload at damaged ports under constant air attack. The cargo that reaches shore must then travel by truck across hundreds of miles of desert to reach German forward positions at El Alamein. A truck consuming its own cargo of fuel to drive 1,000 miles is barely cost-effective. Many aren't cost-effective at all. The British supply situation is completely different, almost absurdly advantageous. Commonwealth forces in Egypt receive supplies via two routes. Primary route goes around Cape of Good Hope, up the African east coast to Suez, 13,000 miles from Britain, but virtually immune to Axis interdiction. Secondary route runs through Mediterranean under heavy naval escort. Both routes terminate at Egyptian ports with intact facilities, railway connections, and short overland distances to the front. A British tank at El Alamein is 200 miles from Port Said. A German tank at El Alamein is 1,400 miles from Tripoli and 2,000 miles from Naples. The logistics differential is 5-1 in Britain's favor for fuel, 3-1 for ammunition, and effectively infinite for replacement equipment. British factories can ship tanks directly to Alexandria. German factories must ship tanks to Italian ports, load them onto vessels that face 40% loss, rate crossing Mediterranean, unload survivors at damaged African ports, then truck them across deserts with no roads. Malta is the dagger in Rommel's supply line. This tiny island between Sicily and Libya hosts British submarines, motor torpedo boats, and bomber squadrons that ravage Italian convoys with mechanical efficiency. The island itself has been under siege for 2 years, receiving barely enough supplies to survive, but it remains operational as a naval and air base. From Malta, British forces can intercept essentially every convoy route between Italy and North Africa. Italian Navy attempts to protect convoys with destroyer escorts, but destroyers cannot defend against submarines stalking the darkness or bombers striking from altitude. The mathematics are implacable. The more supplies Germany needs in Africa, the more ships must cross Mediterranean. The more ships cross Mediterranean, the more targets exist for Malta-based forces. The system scales against Rommel. Success requires more resources, which increases losses, which requires more resources. It's a death spiral disguised as strategy. June 1942. German High Command debates Operation Hercules, the planned airborne invasion of Malta. Capturing the island would eliminate the primary threat to Italian convoys, potentially improving supply delivery to 90% arrival rate. The operation is feasible. German paratroopers proved capability capturing Crete in 1941, though with devastating casualties. Malta's defenses are weaker than Crete's were. The operation could succeed. Hitler tentatively approves. Then Rommel captures Tobruk. The Field Marshal argues passionately that Malta operation is no longer necessary, that he can reach Cairo before supply situation becomes critical, that captured British stockpiles will sustain his advance. Hitler, dazzled by Tobruk's fall, cancels Hercules. Rommel gets permission to continue into Egypt. It's the single most consequential decision of the North African campaign, and it's catastrophically wrong. Every subsequent disaster flows from this moment. By August, with Rommel stalled at El Alamein, the consequences are evident. Fuel shortages immobilize tanks. Ammunition rationing limits artillery support. Medical supplies are so scarce that wounded soldiers face unnecessary suffering. Water, simple drinking water, must be trucked from Libya at enormous fuel cost. German soldiers at El Alamein receive 1 liter of water per man per day, in temperatures exceeding 50 degrees Celsius. They're chronically dehydrated, operating at reduced efficiency, prone to heat casualties. British soldiers receive adequate water, pumped through pipelines from the Nile. The contrast isn't subtle. German positions smell of unwashed bodies and disease. British positions have field showers and regular meals. The logistics differential is becoming a morale differential. German troops know they're losing a war of mathematics even as their tactical skill remains superior. September convoy losses reach 63%. Of 10 ships leaving Italian ports carrying fuel and ammunition, only 4 arrive in Libya. 6 go to the bottom with their cargo. Miller, the quartermaster, updates his charts with increasing despair. At current consumption rates and delivery percentages, the Africa Corps will be immobilized by November. They won't be defeated in battle. They'll simply run out of fuel to move tanks, ammunition to fire guns, and food to feed soldiers. Müller reports this to Rommel's headquarters. The Field Marshal's response is to demand more aggressive action from Italian Navy, more air cover from Luftwaffe, more priority for North African theater from German High Command. All reasonable requests, none achievable. The Italian Navy is doing everything possible and losing ships anyway. The Luftwaffe is fully committed in Russia and cannot spare squadrons for Mediterranean convoy escort. German High Command is planning Stalingrad offensive and considers North Africa a secondary theater. Rommel's demands go nowhere because the fundamental problem isn't will or effort. It's geography and industrial capacity. The British can replace losses faster than they occur. When Montgomery assumes command of 8th Army in August 1942, he finds damaged force, but one that's being systematically rebuilt. Tanks are arriving from American and British factories. Aircraft are stationed in Egypt faster than losses occur. Fresh Commonwealth divisions are completing training and moving to the front. By September, Montgomery commands 195,000 men to Rommel's 104,000. British tank strength reaches 1,029 tanks to Rommel's 547, of which only 389 are German. British artillery superiority is similar. More importantly, British supplies are accumulating in massive dumps behind the lines. Montgomery is building a stockpile for sustained offensive. 300,000 tons of supplies, enough for 6 months of intensive operations. Rommel dreams of such abundance. His entire monthly supply delivery amounts to what the British accumulate in a week. October 1942. Rommel is in Austria on medical leave, suffering from chronic stomach issues, exhaustion, and depression. His doctor has diagnosed stress-related illness and ordered rest. The real illness is strategic hopelessness. Rommel has fought brilliant tactical battles for 18 months, achieved victories celebrated across Germany, earned Hitler's personal favor and promotion to Field Marshal, and he's lost. Not lost a battle or campaign. Lost the war in North Africa through mathematics he couldn't alter and logistics he couldn't conjure through willpower. He knows this now. His letters to Lucy describe the situation with unusual honesty. The supply situation is so catastrophic that I see no possibility of improvement. We will lose North Africa unless something changes fundamentally, and nothing will change. He's still in Austria, sick and depressed, when the British offensive begins. Montgomery has chosen his moment precisely, when Rommel is absent, when German supplies are at lowest point, when British material advantage is overwhelming. The battle will be called El Alamein. It will destroy Rommel's reputation for invincibility and prove that genius cannot overcome logistics indefinitely. The great tragedy of Rommel's North African campaign is that he understood logistics intellectually, but never emotionally. He could calculate fuel consumption rates, ammunition expenditure, and supply delivery percentages. His reports to German High Command accurately described the crisis. But understanding didn't change his behavior. He continued planning offensive operations with inadequate supplies, continued pushing exhausted troops beyond sustainable limits, continued believing that tactical brilliance could overcome material disadvantage. It's the same personality trait that made him great: refusal to accept limitations, conviction that will and aggression can achieve anything. In France, where supply lines were short and enemy collapsed quickly, this trait produced miracles. In North Africa, where supply lines crossed a contested sea and enemy learned to absorb pressure, it produced catastrophe. The logistics of defeat were visible from the beginning. Rommel just refused to see them until too late. Now he's about to experience what happens when an enemy refuses to collapse, possesses overwhelming material advantage, and fights with patience and preparation. The desert fox is about to discover he's been trapped in a box, and the hunter has become the hunted. October 23, 1942, 9:40 p.m., the El Alamein line, Egypt. 1,000 British artillery pieces open fire simultaneously, producing the largest bombardment since World War I. The sound is physical, not just heard but felt, a wall of pressure that collapses tents and sets off avalanches in far-off hills. German soldiers in forward trenches experience the barrage as apocalypse. Shells arrive faster than individual explosions can be distinguished, merging into continuous roar that obliterates thought. The British have stockpiled 300,000 tons of supplies specifically for this offensive. They're expending ammunition at rates that make German quartermasters weep with envy. 900 guns firing 4 rounds per minute for 5 hours equals over 1 million shells. The bombardment is designed to achieve multiple objectives: destroy German forward positions, cut communications, crater defensive zones, but most importantly, announce in unmistakable terms that everything has changed. The British have stopped reacting to Rommel's initiatives. Now they're imposing their will on him. Rommel isn't present for the bombardment's opening. He's still in Austria on medical leave, struggling with jaundice and exhaustion. General Georg Stumme commands in his absence. Stumme is competent, methodical, and completely unprepared for Montgomery's approach. At 9:55 p.m., precisely 15 minutes after the artillery preparation begins, British infantry advances through German minefields behind carefully orchestrated creeping barrage. Engineers follow, clearing paths for armor. This isn't the fluid, improvisational armored warfare that Rommel excels at. This is systematic, methodical destruction. Montgomery's set-piece battle. The British have studied Rommel's methods for 18 months and designed an offensive that negates his advantages. They're not offering opportunities for exploitation or creating confusion he can leverage. They're grinding forward through overwhelming material superiority applied with industrial patience. October the 24th. Stumme drives forward to personally assess the situation, exactly what Rommel would do, and suffers a heart attack in his command vehicle while under fire. He dies at the front, and for critical hours the Afrika Korps has no commander. German responses to British penetrations are uncoordinated, reactive, wasteful of the limited fuel and ammunition available. When Rommel receives urgent summons from headquarters on October 25th, flies back to Africa, and arrives at his headquarters that evening, he discovers the situation is far worse than emergency reports indicated. British forces have achieved multiple penetrations of his defensive line. His reserves are committed piecemeal fighting fires rather than concentrated for decisive counterattack. Fuel situation is critical, barely enough for 3 days of mobile operations. And Montgomery shows no sign of stopping. Rommel's assessment is brutal and immediate. With adequate supplies, he could conduct mobile defense that might defeat this offensive. But he doesn't have adequate supplies. His fuel reserves are approximately 1/10 what Montgomery possesses. His ammunition stocks cannot sustain counter-battery fire against British artillery. He has 238 operational German tanks against Britain's 1,000 plus. The numbers are catastrophic. But Rommel is constitutionally incapable of accepting defensive posture. He orders immediate counterattacks, despite staff objections about fuel scarcity. Over the next 4 days, German armor charges British positions repeatedly, achieving tactical effects, destroying significant numbers of British tanks, but consuming irreplaceable fuel and suffering losses that cannot be replaced. By October 28th, German tank strength is down to 177 operational vehicles. British strength has been reduced to 800, but is being replenished daily by tanks arriving from rear area depots. November 2nd. Montgomery launches Operation Supercharge, the decisive blow designed to rupture German lines. The attack focuses on a narrow front, preceded by massive artillery bombardment, supported by overwhelming armor. German forces defend skillfully, extracting heavy price from British attacks. But the mathematics are inexorable. For every German tank destroyed, the British can replace it. For every German tank destroyed, Rommel's effective force decreases permanently. By evening on November 2nd, a clean breakthrough appears imminent. German defensive positions are fragmenting. Units are running out of ammunition. Several battalion commanders report inability to continue resistance. Rommel faces the decision every general dreads: order forces to hold position and be destroyed, or order retreat and lose the battle definitively. Military logic demands immediate retreat before remaining forces are encircled, but Hitler has other ideas. On November 3, Rommel receives direct order from Führer headquarters. In the situation in which you find yourself, there can be no other thought but to stand fast, yield not a yard of ground, and throw every gun and every man into the battle. You can show your troops no other road than that to victory or death. The order is militarily insane. Standing fast means the entire Afrika Korps will be encircled and destroyed within 48 hours. Rommel's staff officers argue for immediate disregard of the order. They point out that Hitler is 1,200 miles from the battlefield, doesn't understand the actual situation, and is ordering destruction of Germany's only effective force in North Africa. Rommel agrees with their analysis, but faces impossible dilemma: disobey Hitler's direct order and accept responsibility for retreat's consequences, or obey and watch his army be annihilated. For 12 hours, he obeys. Units are ordered to hold position. Encirclement begins developing. Then, on November 4, Rommel makes the decision that probably saves the Afrika Korps from total destruction. He disobeys Hitler. The retreat begins. The withdrawal is conducted with professional skill that partially salvages disaster. German rear guards conduct fighting retreats, slowing British pursuit, buying time for main forces to escape encirclement. Italian infantry divisions, lacking motorized transport, are abandoned to their fate. Over 25,000 Italian soldiers surrender in the first 3 days of retreat because German trucks prioritize evacuating German personnel. It's calculated ethnic prioritization, dressed as military necessity, and it destroys what remains of Axis alliance cohesion. Italian commanders bitterly note that German forces always find transport for their own men while leaving Italians to face capture. They're not wrong. Rommel is ruthlessly preserving his most valuable assets, trained German soldiers and functioning equipment, at expense of allied Italian forces. The chivalry he shows British officers doesn't extend to supposed allies. The scale of defeat becomes clear over following weeks. Rommel has suffered approximately 30,000 casualties, 13,000 Germans killed, wounded, or captured, 17,000 Italians captured. 500 tanks have been lost, including most of his German armor. 400 artillery pieces are abandoned. 127 aircraft are destroyed. British losses are significant: 13,500 casualties, 440 tanks damaged or destroyed, but entirely sustainable given their supply situation and replacement rates. More importantly, Rommel has lost something intangible but critical: his aura of invincibility. For 2 years, German propaganda presented him as the general who always found a way to win. Alamein proves definitively that he can be beaten by enemy with material superiority and competent leadership. The myth begins cracking. November 13. British forces reoccupies Tobruk. The fortress Rommel captured in June falls back into British hands without a shot fired. German forces are too far west, retreating too rapidly to defend it. The supplies Rommel captured and used to advance into Egypt are recaptured by their original owners. The entire Tobruk campaign, Rommel's greatest operational triumph, is reversed. He's retreating through territory he conquered 18 months earlier, past battlefields where he achieved brilliant victories. Watching his army disintegrate from attrition, he cannot stop. Fuel shortages force abandonment of vehicles that could be repaired. Ammunition shortages mean units cannot effectively resist British pressure. The retreat is becoming a rout, held together only by professionalism of junior officers and NCOs who somehow maintain unit cohesion despite catastrophic circumstances. December 1942. Rommel withdraws from Benghazi, abandoning Cyrenaica entirely. He's retreated 600 miles in 6 weeks. The entire North African campaign has been reversed. All territorial gains from April 1941 onward are lost. The Afrika Korps is intact as an organization, but gutted as a fighting force. Strength is down to approximately 40,000 Germans and 30,000 Italians, with fewer than 50 operational tanks. The retreat will continue another 1,000 miles, all the way across Libya into Tunisia, where fresh German forces are arriving to establish a final defensive line. But that's a different campaign. El Alamein is over. Rommel has been decisively, irrefutably defeated by an enemy who refused to panic, who possessed overwhelming material advantage, and who fought with systematic patience that gave German tactical skill no opportunity to achieve decisive effect. Churchill will later call El Alamein the turning point of the war. It isn't that in strategic terms, Stalingrad and Midway matter far more, but it's the moment when German military mystique fractures publicly. Rommel was the face of German success. The general even enemies admired. His defeat demonstrates that German forces can be beaten by properly led, adequately supplied Allied armies. The myth of German invincibility, already damaged by Stalingrad, suffers public relations catastrophe at El Alamein. Rommel's reputation survives, partly because even in defeat he's conducted skillful retreat, partly because Allied propaganda continues finding him useful as embodiment of honorable German soldier. But something fundamental has shifted. He's no longer the unstoppable desert fox. He's a brilliant general who lost to better logistics and patient enemy. The question now is what happens to a man whose entire identity is built on winning, when he's forced to retreat for months on end, when every battle is fought from position of material inferiority, when the war he's fighting cannot be won. The answer will unfold over the next 18 months, as Rommel transitions from Hitler's favorite general to participant in conspiracy against the Führer himself. But that transformation begins here, in the dust and defeat of El Alamein, where tactical genius collided with strategic mathematics and lost. November 15, 1942, somewhere in the Libyan desert between Tobruk and Benghazi. A column of Italian infantry trudges east through the cold desert night, heading toward British lines in captivity. They've been abandoned. 24 hours ago, these men were part of the Ariete Armored Division, technically an Italian armored formation, though most of their vehicles were destroyed weeks ago at El Alamein. Yesterday, their German liaison officer informed them that motorized transport was unavailable for withdrawal. The trucks exist. Italian soldiers can hear them in the darkness, engines idling at German assembly areas 3 miles distant. But those trucks are reserved for evacuating German personnel and critical equipment. Italian infantry can walk or surrender. Most are choosing surrender. They're starving, exhausted, demoralized by months of retreat. Their officers rage about German betrayal. But rage doesn't conjure transport. By morning, roughly 6,000 Italian soldiers will begin the march into prisoner of war camps, abandoned by allies who supposedly needed their sacrifice to enable the Germanic retreat. It's not the first time this has happened during Rommel's retreat. It won't be the last. The pattern is systematic and deliberate. Rommel has finite motorized transport and exponentially more personnel than trucks can evacuate. Every gallon of fuel must make impossible choices: move troops or move equipment, save Germans or save Italians, preserve combat power or rescue headquarters staff. Rommel's priorities are clear and brutal. German combat units receive transport first. German support units receive transport second. Equipment that can kill British tanks receives transport third. Italian forces receive whatever remains, which is usually nothing. The official justification is military efficiency. German units are more capable, better trained, more likely to fight effectively in future operations. The reality is racial hierarchy made operational. German lives matter. Italian lives are expedient. Rommel didn't create this system. It's standard Wehrmacht practice wherever German and non-German forces serve together. But he implements it without apparent qualms, abandoning tens of thousands of Allied soldiers while preserving German forces. December 1st. A meeting between Rommel and Italian General Giovanni Mese, who commands remaining Italian forces in North Africa. Mese is furious, barely controlling rage at German treatment of Italian troops. He presents casualty figures: 40,000 Italian soldiers captured during the retreat, not because they were overrun in battle, but because they were left without transport, food, or hope. German casualties during same period, approximately 7,000. The disparity isn't explained by different levels of combat exposure, it's explained by different access to withdrawal transport. Mese demands German assistance evacuating Italian units currently threatened with encirclement. Rommel responds that transport is inadequate for all forces, that military effectiveness requires preserving most capable units, that Italian soldiers can be replaced more easily than German veterans. Mese leaves the meeting understanding that Axis alliance is fiction. Germany fights for Germany. Italy is a convenient auxiliary to be expended as necessary. The retreat reveals Rommel at his least admirable. He's not personally cruel or sadistic. He doesn't order atrocities or abuse prisoners. But he operates within a system that treats human life as a resource to be allocated based on racial value. And he never questions this system. His famous chivalry has strict boundaries. British officers captured in North Africa receive correct treatment per Geneva Convention, adequate food, medical care, and eventual transport to proper POW camps. This isn't humanity, it's calculation. Rommel understands that Germans will also be captured, and correct treatment of enemy officers ensures reciprocal treatment of German officers. But this consideration doesn't extend to non-white Commonwealth troops or to Italian allies. Indian soldiers fighting for Britain face primitive conditions in German POW camps: inadequate food, minimal medical care, racial abuse from guards. African soldiers fighting for France are separated into labor battalions under brutal conditions. Italian soldiers are simply abandoned. The pattern is consistent. Rommel respects enemies who fit Nazi racial categories of worthiness. Everyone else is expendable. January 23, 1943. Rommel withdraws from Tripoli, his last major position in Libya. British forces enter the city unopposed on the same day. The retreat has covered 800 miles in 10 weeks. Rommel's forces are exhausted, reduced to fewer than 50,000 effectives, desperately short of every supply category. But they're still intact as an organization, still capable of fighting, still led by officers who maintain discipline despite catastrophic circumstances. The skill of this retreat is remarkable from purely military perspective. Rommel has salvaged a force that should have been destroyed at El Alamein, conducted fighting withdrawal across 800 miles while maintaining organizational coherence, and delivered his remaining units to defensive positions in Tunisia, where they can link up with fresh German forces arriving from Europe. It's professional competence at the highest level. It also represents complete strategic failure. All territorial gains from April 1941 are lost. North Africa is being lost. The entire campaign has been pointless waste of men and materiel in a theater that never mattered strategically. But Rommel is discovering that retreat teaches lessons victory doesn't. For 2 years, he's advanced through France, into Egypt, back and forth across Libya. He's fought mobile warfare where his tactical genius could achieve decisive effects, where speed and aggression could overcome material disadvantage, where enemy confusion could be exploited before it resolved. Now he's retreating, fighting defensively, preserving forces rather than destroying enemies. And he's learning that defensive warfare requires different qualities: patience, systematic preparation, accepting casualties to preserve positions. These aren't his strengths. His entire command style is built on aggressive action, personal leadership at crisis points, intuitive decisions based on immediate observation. Defensive warfare requires trusting subordinates to hold positions, while commander coordinates larger battle. Accepting that some positions will be lost, fighting for time rather than space. Rommel understands this intellectually, but struggles to implement it temperamentally. He still wants to counterattack, to seize initiative, to impose his will on enemy, but he lacks resources for such operations. February 14, 1943. The Battle of Kasserine Pass, Tunisia. Rommel's last offensive operation in North Africa. and perhaps his most controversial. American forces, fresh to the theater and untested in combat, occupy positions in the Kasserine Pass, controlling routes into Tunisia. Rommel attacks with 5th Panzer Army, achieving complete surprise and routing American defenders. The attack is tactically brilliant, exploiting American inexperience and poor defensive positioning. Within 2 days, American forces have retreated 30 miles, lost 6,500 casualties, abandoned massive supply stocks. It's humiliating defeat for United States Army, sobering introduction to Wehrmacht tactical proficiency. But it's also strategically meaningless. Rommel has achieved local victory with forces that cannot exploit it. He lacks fuel to pursue deeply into American rear areas. His supplies cannot sustain extended offensive, and British forces are advancing from the east, threatening encirclement if he remains committed too far west. The battle demonstrates both his genius and his growing limitations. The Rommel who attacked at Kasserine is still the brilliant tactician who tore across France in 1940. He identifies weak points, exploits them ruthlessly, creates psychological effects beyond his actual strength. But he's also sick, exhausted, operating with inadequate intelligence and resources. After the initial breakthrough, his follow-up attacks are poorly coordinated. He misses opportunities to destroy American forces completely. The offensive peters out within 4 days, having achieved tactical effects but no strategic results. It's a microcosm of his entire North African experience. Brilliant attacks, dramatic victories, ultimate pointlessness. He's winning battles in a campaign Germany is losing, achieving tactical effects that don't change strategic mathematics. And he knows this now. His letters to Lucy during this period are filled with despair. He writes that the war cannot be won, that Germany's strategic situation is hopeless, that Hitler's leadership is catastrophic. These are dangerous thoughts for any German officer. For one as close to Hitler as Rommel, they're nearly treasonous. March 9th, 1943. Rommel departs North Africa for the last time, summoned to Germany for health reasons. The official story is that his chronic illness requires treatment unavailable in the field. The reality is more complex. German high command wants him away from North Africa before the final collapse, preserving his reputation by removing him before inevitable defeat. Hitler still values Rommel's propaganda, worth even as he questions his judgment. The Field Marshal who captured Tobruk and reached the gates of Cairo remains useful for morale purposes. But the Field Marshal currently conducting another fighting retreat, abandoning Italian allies, and writing defeatist letters is a liability. Rommel leaves his remaining forces under command of General Hans-Jürgen von Arnim, an able officer who will fight competently for 2 more months before final surrender. Rommel will be thousands of miles away when 250,000 Axis troops, including his Afrika Korps veterans, march into captivity in May 1943. The North African campaign is over. Rommel's portion of it ended in failure, despite tactical brilliance, operational skill, and personal courage that remain undeniable. He fought for 2 years in impossible conditions, achieved victories that shocked the world, earned reputation as the finest battlefield commander of his generation. And he lost. He lost because logistics defeated tactics, because material superiority overwhelmed skill, because strategy trumped operations. He lost because he was fighting for a regime conducting a fundamentally evil war, with inadequate resources in a secondary theater that never mattered strategically. These truths will take time to fully process. For now, he's simply exhausted, sick, defeated, and increasingly aware that Germany itself is losing the war his tactical genius couldn't prevent. The question before him, as he leaves Africa, is what a defeated general does with this knowledge. The answer will lead him into conspiracy, resistance, and ultimately forced suicide. But that story begins after Africa. The desert fox has left the desert. What remains is a very human man, facing very difficult choices with approximately 18 months left to live. December 15th, 1943. The French coastline near Calais, where winter winds cut across concrete fortifications stained with salt spray. Field Marshal Erwin Rommel walks along the Atlantic Wall for the first time as its newly appointed inspector, and what he sees appalls him. The propaganda photographs show massive bunkers, interlocking fields of fire, an impregnable fortress stretching from Norway to Spain. The reality is an enormous bluff. Rommel counts the positions. Concrete gun emplacements are spaced hundreds of meters apart, where Doctrine requires overlapping coverage. Many bunkers are incomplete, lacking reinforced roofs or proper ammunition storage. Some positions have guns but no fire control equipment. Others have fire control equipment but no guns. The troops manning these positions are a mixture of overage Germans, conscripted foreigners of questionable loyalty, and teenagers too young for Eastern Front service. This is supposed to be the defensive line that prevents Allied invasion of Europe. Rommel writes in his inspection report that evening, "The Atlantic Wall is an enormous bluff, more valuable as propaganda than as military reality." Hitler assigned him this role, believing Rommel's reputation will inspire troops and frighten allies. The appointment also keeps Rommel away from Africa, as that campaign collapses into final surrender. It's a useful posting for a general too famous to discard, but too defeatist to trust with active operations. Rommel approaches the assignment with characteristic energy and mounting dread. He has spent 9 months in Germany, recuperating from illness, watching newsreels from Stalingrad, processing the reality of North Africa's loss, and slowly understanding that Germany is losing the war on every front. The Eastern Front is bleeding the Wehrmacht to death. The strategic bombing campaign is destroying German cities. Allied forces control the Mediterranean. And now, inevitably, the Allies will invade Western Europe to open the Second Front Stalin has been demanding for 2 years. Rommel's task is to ensure this invasion fails. He has 6 months, inadequate resources, and strategic situation that worsens daily. His inspection tour consumes January 1944. He travels from Holland to Brittany, examining every significant defensive sector, interviewing commanders, assessing readiness. The problems are systemic and overwhelming. Construction has focused on the Pays de Calais, the shortest distance from England, where Hitler is convinced the invasion will come. Other sectors are thinly defended. Minefields are incomplete or non-existent. Beach obstacles are insufficient. The defensive concept is confused. Some sectors emphasize static defense in coastal bunkers. Others plan mobile counterattacks with armored reserves. No unified doctrine exists. Field Marshal Gerd von Rundstedt, overall commander in the West, believes the invasion cannot be stopped at the beaches and plans to defeat it through mobile warfare inland. Rommel violently disagrees. His North African experience taught him that Allied air superiority makes mobile warfare suicidal. Moving reserves in daylight means exposure to Allied fighter bombers that will destroy columns before they reach the battlefield. January 1944. Rommel's strategic assessment, delivered to Hitler in formal memorandum, is brutal and prophetic. The war will be won or lost on the beaches. We will have only one chance to defeat the invasion during the first 24 hours. The enemy's air superiority will prevent movement of reserves. Therefore, the first waves must be destroyed immediately before they can establish a foothold. If we fail to throw the enemy back into the sea on the first day, we will be unable to do so later. We will have lost the war in the West. The analysis is correct, and Hitler accepts Rommel's recommendation to strengthen beach defenses massively. But accepting the recommendation and providing resources to implement it are different things. Germany's industrial capacity is overwhelmed. Concrete and steel are desperately needed for U-boat construction, aircraft production, and Eastern Front fortifications. Allocating vast quantities to build beach obstacles in France means reducing allocations elsewhere. Rommel gets some resources, never enough, always with the understanding that other fronts have higher priority. He drives his engineers mercilessly. Between January and June 1944, German forces install 517,000 obstacles along the French coast. Rommel's asparagus, angled stakes designed to impale landing craft, sprout from beaches at low tide line. Czech hedgehogs, welded steel obstacles designed to rip open landing craft hulls, dot the shallows. Concrete tetrahedrons create barriers to tanks. Minefields are laid behind the beaches. In approach roads, in fields where airborne troops might land. 6,500,000 mines are planted under Rommel's direction. Bunkers are reinforced. Artillery positions are camouflaged. Anti-aircraft positions are strengthened. The work is exhausting, never-ending, and by Rommel's own assessment, still inadequate. He needs 15,000 bunkers. He gets fewer than 2,000 completed. He needs continuous minefields. He gets patches with gaps that clever attackers can exploit. He needs every approach covered by interlocking fire. He gets strong points separated by weakly defended coastline. The fundamental problem is the same one that destroyed him in North Africa. Inadequate resources spread across impossible frontage. The Atlantic Wall supposedly defends 2,400 miles of coastline. Rommel has 60 divisions, many under strength, to defend this distance. That's an average of 40 miles per division, absurd by any defensive standard. NATO doctrine in the Cold War will call for 1 division per 10 kilometers for prepared defense against conventional attack. Rommel has 1 division per 64 kilometers, defending against the largest amphibious invasion in history. The mathematics are impossible. He must guess where the invasion will come and concentrate forces there, leaving other sectors thinly defended. If he guesses wrong, the Allies will land in weakly defended sectors and establish beachheads before German reserves can arrive. If he guesses right, but Hitler refuses to release reserves promptly, the result is the same. His defense depends on factors beyond his control: Allied invasion site, weather conditions, and Hitler's willingness to trust his judgment. The dispute with von Rundstedt intensifies through spring 1944. Von Rundstedt represents old-school German military thinking: defense in depth, mobile reserves, counterattack after enemy intentions become clear. It's the doctrine that worked on the Eastern Front, where German armies have space to trade for time, where operational maneuver can encircle and destroy enemy penetrations. Rommel argues this approach is obsolete in the face of Allied air superiority. Any attempt to move panzer divisions in daylight will be destroyed by fighter bombers before reaching battle. The reserves must be positioned close to likely invasion sites, pre-deployed, where they can counterattack immediately without road movements visible to Allied aircraft. The debate becomes heated, personal, and ultimately unresolvable. Von Rundstedt outranks Rommel, but Rommel has Hitler's confidence. The result is a compromise that satisfies no one. Some panzer divisions placed forward under Rommel's control, others held in reserve under von Rundstedt's command, and some placed in central reserve that can only be released by Hitler's personal authorization. May 1944. Allied bombers systematically destroy French transportation infrastructure, bridges, rail yards, marshalling areas, in what they call the transportation plan. Every raid proves Rommel's argument about air superiority. German attempts to move reserves by rail result in trains bombed in stations or tracks destroyed before they arrive. Road movements during daylight are suicide. A panzer division moving 100 miles by road in daylight loses 30% of its vehicles to air attack. The only safe movement is at night, which is slow, exhausting, and impossible to coordinate during fluid battle. Von Rundstedt watches this demonstration of Allied air power and still believes mobile warfare is possible. Rommel watches the same demonstration and knows the invasion will be decided in hours, not days. Whichever side controls the beachhead at dusk on D-Day will control the campaign. If German forces throw the Allies back into the sea on the first day, Germany might survive. If Allies establish beachhead and hold it for 24 hours, their air power and naval gunfire will protect it from counterattack. The window for German victory is measured in hours. June 4th, 1944. Rommel departs France for Germany, leaving his chief of staff in command. It's Lucia's birthday on June 6th, and he's promised to be there. The weather is terrible: heavy clouds, high winds, rough seas. Allied meteorologists are predicting improvement on June 6th, but German meteorologists believe invasion is impossible for at least 2 weeks. Rommel trusts his meteorologists. He also desperately wants time with his wife. The strain of the past year has been enormous: defeat in Africa, recognition that Germany is losing the war, knowledge that his defensive preparations are inadequate. He's 52 years old, physically exhausted, mentally strained, emotionally isolated. Lucy represents stability, normalcy, the life he had before war consumed everything. The drive to Germany takes him 500 miles from Normandy. He'll be there on June 6th, celebrating his wife's birthday while 5,000 ships carry 156,000 Allied troops toward the beaches he's spent 6 months fortifying. The coincidence will haunt him for the rest of his life. 16 months, but he doesn't know that yet. For now, he's just tired, hopeful the weather will give him a few days' rest, confident his defenses will hold when the invasion comes. He's wrong on every count. June 5, evening. Rommel is at home in Herrlingen, Germany, 500 miles from France. His staff officers are scattered, some on leave, some conducting inspections, all believing weather makes invasion impossible for days or weeks. The panzer reserves Rommel wanted placed forward are still positioned inland, many more than 50 miles from the coast. The panzer divisions in Hitler's Central Reserve are around Paris, 100 miles from Normandy. Getting them released will require convincing Hitler, which will require waking Hitler, which nobody wants to do because the Führer's sleeping schedule is sacred. The defensive system Rommel designed assumes he'll be present to coordinate response, that reserves will be released immediately, that German forces will react within hours of landing. None of these assumptions will prove valid. At this moment, Allied naval forces are already at sea, paratroopers are boarding aircraft, and the largest invasion in history is approximately 12 hours from hitting beaches that will be defended by surprise, scattered forces, lacking clear direction from their absent commander. The Atlantic Wall is about to be tested. Rommel's theories about beach defense versus mobile warfare are about to be proven or disproven. His 6 months of exhausting preparation are about to face the reality of Allied material superiority, air power, and meticulous planning. And the Field Marshal, who declared that Germany has only one chance to win, only one day to throw the enemy back into the sea, is 500 miles away celebrating his wife's birthday. The irony is profound and tragic. Rommel prepared as well as possible with inadequate resources. He understood the strategic situation better than most German commanders. He knew exactly what needed to happen to defeat the invasion. And when the moment arrives, he's absent. His forces are dispersed. His reserves are withheld, and his defensive system is about to face the supreme test without the man who designed it. The result will prove him right about almost everything, except the belief that being right matters when the resources and authority to act on being right are withheld. D-Day is coming, and the Desert Fox is not in his den. June 6, 1944, 6:30 a.m. A telephone rings in Rommel's home in Herrlingen, Germany. His chief of staff, General Hans Speidel, is calling from France with news that will end any hope of German victory in the West. Allied airborne troops have been landing in Normandy since shortly after midnight. Naval bombardment of the coast began at dawn. Landing craft are now hitting the beaches in multiple locations between the Cotentin Peninsula and Caen. The invasion Rommel has been preparing for is happening now, and he's 500 miles away. Rommel's response is instantaneous fury, at himself for being absent, at the meteorologists for being wrong, at the situation for developing without his presence. He orders his driver to prepare his vehicle immediately. No time for aircraft, which require flight plans and authorization. He'll drive. Lucy watches her husband disappear within 15 minutes of the phone call, still wearing the casual clothes from her birthday celebration. She won't see him again for months. He won't see her alive again, though neither knows this yet. The drive takes 15 hours. 15 hours while the battle that will determine Germany's fate in Western Europe unfolds without its most experienced defensive commander. Rommel drives through France at maximum speed, monitoring radio reports, trying to understand a battle scattered across 50 miles of coastline. The news is catastrophic. Allied forces are landing at 5 beaches: Utah, Omaha, Gold, Juno, and Sword. Some landings are going smoothly, with troops advancing inland within hours. Others are contested fiercely, particularly at Omaha Beach, where American forces are taking heavy casualties. But nowhere are the invaders being thrown back into the sea. Nowhere is Rommel's nightmare scenario, immediate destruction of first waves before they can consolidate, happening. The Atlantic Wall is not holding. and the panzer reserves that could counterattack decisively are immobilized, awaiting authorization from Hitler that isn't coming, because nobody wants to wake the Führer. Rommel arrives at his headquarters near La Roche-Guyon at 10:30 p.m. He's been driving for 16 hours. The battle has been raging for 19 hours. And in those 19 hours, while German commanders debated, while reserves waited for authorization, while defensive doctrine proved inadequate, the Allies have established a beachhead. Not a fragile toehold that German counterattacks can eliminate. A substantial lodgment with 156,000 troops ashore, supplies flowing across the beaches, naval gunfire protecting the perimeter, and complete air superiority preventing German daylight movement. Rommel's prediction has come true. The battle was won or lost in the first 24 hours, and it's been lost. The Germans didn't destroy the invasion on the beaches, therefore, they will not destroy it at all. Everything that follows will be delaying action, trading space for time in a campaign Germany cannot win. Rommel understands this immediately. Most German commanders will take weeks to reach the same conclusion. The strategic situation is even worse than immediate tactical disaster suggests. Allied forces have landed with overwhelming material superiority. 12,000 aircraft versus 300 operational Luftwaffe. 6,000 ships including specialized landing craft and industrial capacity to replace any losses within days. German forces defending Normandy cannot be reinforced faster than they're being destroyed because Allied fighter bombers massacre any daylight movement. Rommel's predictions about air superiority proving decisive are vindicated in the most painful way possible. Panzer divisions attempting to move toward Normandy lose 30 to 40% of their vehicles to air attack before reaching battle. Artillery units are destroyed on approach roads. Supply convoys are incinerated. Any concentration of German forces larger than company size attracts immediate airstrikes with results that are catastrophic. June 10th. Rommel visits the front personally, as he always does, seeking to understand through direct observation what staff reports cannot convey. What he sees is technological horror unprecedented in his experience. Allied naval gunfire, 16-inch shells from battleships offshore, obliterates any defensive position within range of the coast. The explosions are visible from miles inland, pillars of smoke and earth rising where German strongpoints existed moments before. German counterattacks attempting to reach the beachhead are destroyed by this naval artillery before they can close with enemy infantry, and above everything constantly are Allied aircraft. Fighters strafe anything that moves. Medium bombers crater road junctions. Heavy bombers turn towns into rubble that blocks German movement more effectively than demolitions could. The Luftwaffe is essentially absent. Rommel's troops report seeing Allied aircraft constantly, but haven't seen a German fighter in days. The sky belongs to the enemy, and control of the sky means control of the battle. June 17th. Rommel and von Rundstedt request meeting with Hitler to explain the situation and request authorization for strategic withdrawal from Normandy before German forces are destroyed in futile defense. Hitler summons them to Margaville, his command post in northern France. The meeting is surreal and horrifying. Rommel presents factual assessment. German forces cannot hold Normandy against Allied material superiority and air power. Every day of continued defense costs irreplaceable casualties. The rational strategy is to withdraw to defensible line along the Seine River, shortening supply lines while forcing Allies to extend theirs, then defend from positions where German forces aren't subjected to naval gunfire. Hitler interrupts repeatedly, raging about defeatism, demanding impossible counteroffensives, insisting that willpower can overcome material disadvantage. He speaks of new wonder weapons, V-1 rockets, jet aircraft, improved tanks, that will turn the tide. Rommel tries to explain that wonder weapons arriving in months won't save forces being destroyed now. Hitler refuses to listen. The meeting reveals how completely Hitler has detached from military reality. He issues orders based on map positions without understanding conditions troops face. He demands counterattacks by divisions that have been destroyed. He expects naval gunfire to be overcome through aggressive spirit. When Rommel describes Allied air superiority, Hitler responds that Luftwaffe fighters are being conserved for decisive moment. When Rommel asks when this decisive moment will arrive, Hitler has no answer except more rage at defeatist thinking. Von Rundstedt, normally deferential to Hitler, supports Rommel's assessment. Both field marshals leave the meeting understanding that Germany will fight for Normandy regardless of military logic, that Hitler will not authorize strategic withdrawal, that German forces will be ground down through attritional combat they cannot win. It's a death sentence for divisions in Normandy and a revelation about Hitler's mental state that neither field marshal can openly acknowledge. June 29th, Rommel writes a letter to Hitler that he ultimately never sends. It's found in his papers after his death, a document of extraordinary honesty and political danger. The troops are fighting heroically everywhere, but the unequal struggle is nearing its end. I must ask you to draw the conclusions from this situation without delay. I feel it my duty to express myself plainly as Commander-in-Chief of the Army Group. The conclusions Rommel wants Hitler to draw are unstated but obvious. Negotiate peace with the Western Allies before Germany is completely destroyed. Accept that the war is lost. Spare the German people from further suffering. Writing such sentiments is near treason for a German field marshal in 1944. Actually sending them would be suicidal. Rommel keeps the letter, unable to deliver truths he knows Hitler won't accept, unwilling to continue the charade that Germany can win. He's trapped between military reality and political impossibility. July 17. The trap becomes literal. Rommel is returning from frontline inspection when Allied fighter-bombers strafe his staff car on a road near Sainte-Foy de Montgomery. The attack comes without warning. Typhoon fighters diving from cloud cover, 20mm cannons tearing through the vehicle's thin armor. Rommel's driver is killed instantly. The car crashes into a ditch. Rommel is thrown from the vehicle, striking his head on a tree. The injuries are severe. Skull fracture, brain trauma, left eye damaged, extensive facial lacerations. He's unconscious when his staff pull him from the wreckage. The man who personally led every attack, who exposed himself to fire repeatedly in France, North Africa, and Normandy, has finally been hit. Not in dramatic combat, but in random air attack on a country road. He's rushed to hospital in Bernay, then transferred to a Paris hospital where surgeons stabilize his condition. He'll survive, but the injuries end his combat career. He'll be unconscious or barely conscious for days. He'll miss the most significant event of his life. July 20th. 3 days after Rommel is wounded, Colonel Klaus von Stauffenberg places a briefcase bomb under the conference table at Hitler's East Prussia headquarters and walks out. The explosion kills 4 people, but Hitler survives, protected by the heavy oak table. The July 20th plot, the most significant attempt to assassinate Hitler and overthrow the Nazi regime, has failed. Within hours, the Gestapo begins arresting everyone connected to the conspiracy. Within days, they'll discover Rommel's name mentioned repeatedly in interrogations. Not that Rommel participated in the assassination attempt. He was unconscious in a hospital when it happened. But that he knew about the broader conspiracy to remove Hitler from power, that he agreed Germany must make peace, that he was potentially willing to lead a post-Hitler government. The evidence is circumstantial, based on testimony from tortured conspirators. But it's enough to mark Rommel for death. He just doesn't know it yet. August 1944. Normandy falls. German forces conduct fighting withdrawal from the Falaise pocket, taking catastrophic casualties. Allied armies break out from Normandy and sweep across France at speeds that rival German blitzkrieg of 1940. Paris is liberated. The entire Western Front is collapsing. German units are retreating toward the Reich itself, attempting to establish defensive lines that might slow Allied advance. The war in the West that Rommel predicted would be won or lost on the beaches of Normandy has been lost. His defensive concept was correct. The invasion had to be stopped immediately or not at all. His execution was undermined by inadequate resources, political interference, and his own absence at the crucial moment. And now he lies in a hospital bed in Germany, recovering from head trauma, reading reports of disaster, knowing the war is lost. unaware that the Gestapo is building a case that will force him to choose between trial for treason and suicide with family protected. The Desert Fox, the youngest field marshal, the general who won impossible victories through audacity and skill, has run out of audacity and options. His war is over. His reckoning is just beginning. July 15th, 1944, late afternoon. A hospital room in Vézenay, France, where Rommel recuperates from the attack on Normandy beaches weeks earlier. He receives an unexpected visitor. Karl Strolin, the mayor of Stuttgart, and an old friend from before the war. They have known each other since 1911, when both were young men beginning careers in Württemberg. But Strolin hasn't driven hours to reminisce. He's come with a message from circles Rommel has been avoiding but can no longer ignore. The resistance. Officers who believe Hitler is leading Germany to total destruction. Men who think the only way to save Germany is to remove the Führer from power. Strolin speaks carefully, using hypotheticals, testing Rommel's reaction. What would you do, he asks, if Hitler were no longer in command? Could you imagine yourself leading a post-Hitler government? Would you be willing to negotiate peace with the Western Allies while excluding the Soviets? Rommel's responses are cautious but revealing. He doesn't reject the premise. He doesn't report the conversation as treasonous. Instead, he says something that will seal his fate when later revealed under torture. I believe it my duty to come to the rescue of Germany. The conversation is not isolated. Over the previous 6 months, Rommel has been approached multiple times by officers involved in, or adjacent to, the conspiracy against Hitler. General Heinrich von Stülpnagel, military governor of France, has discussed the need to remove Hitler. General Hans Speidel, Rommel's chief of staff, has facilitated meetings with resistance members. Colonel Caesar von Hofacker, a staff officer connected to the conspiracy's leadership, has explicitly asked whether Rommel would support a coup. The conversations have common themes. Germany is losing the war catastrophically. Hitler refuses to accept reality. Continuing the war means national suicide. The only hope is to remove Hitler and negotiate peace with the Western Allies. Rommel's responses vary, but trend toward agreement. He says Hitler has lost touch with reality. He says Germany cannot win militarily. He says peace must be negotiated before the country is completely destroyed. What he never explicitly says is whether he'll actively participate in removing Hitler from power. This ambiguity is partly genuine uncertainty and partly calculated protection. Rommel is no political sophisticate. He's a soldier who spent his career avoiding politics, trusting that military excellence would be enough. Now he's being forced to recognize that military excellence within an evil system makes him complicit in evil. The Normandy battle has shattered his remaining illusions about honorable warfare. He's watched French civilians caught in the fighting, towns obliterated by Allied bombing and German demolitions, refugees streaming away from battle zones. He knows about the SS divisions operating in France, about reprisals against resistance members, about the beginning of deportations of French Jews to camps in the East. He's insulated himself from these things, maintained belief that Wehrmacht operations are distinct from Nazi political crimes. But the insulation is collapsing. The war he's fighting is inextricable from the regime conducting it. If he continues serving Hitler, he's responsible for what Hitler does with German military power. Yet Rommel cannot quite commit to active resistance. Partly this is character. He spent his entire adult life as a soldier, believing in obedience and military honor, conditioned to follow orders even when disagreeing with them. Partly it's calculation. He's seen what happens to officers who oppose Hitler. They're removed from command, arrested, sometimes executed. Conspiracy is dangerous, likely to fail, certain to destroy his family if it fails. And partly it's vanity. He's Germany's most famous general, recipient of Hitler's personal favor and highest decorations. To admit he's been serving evil requires admitting his entire career has been complicity in catastrophe. That's psychologically difficult to accept. So, he occupies a middle position that satisfies no one, agreeing with the resistance about Germany's situation, accepting that Hitler must go, but never explicitly committing to act. This ambiguity will destroy him. July 17th. 2 days after Strolin's visit, Rommel is wounded in the air attack that ends his active service. He's unconscious when evacuated from France, barely conscious during initial treatment, and only gradually recovering awareness in the hospital where the worst news of his life is about to arrive. He's missed the critical 3 days when he might have made definitive choices. He cannot now participate in the assassination attempt. He's in a hospital bed with skull fracture. He cannot distance himself from the conspiracy. His previous conversations are documented in letters, witnessed by staff officers, known to multiple conspirators. And he cannot protect himself from what's coming. The Gestapo investigation that will trace every connection, interrogate every participant, and eventually arrive at his name with evidence that, while circumstantial, is sufficient for Hitler's purposes. July 20th. Stauffenberg places the briefcase bomb and leaves the conference room at Wolfschanze, Hitler's East Prussian headquarters. The explosion at 12:42 p.m. kills 4 men: General Rudolf Schmundt, Hitler's chief adjutant; General Günther Korten, Luftwaffe Chief of Staff; Colonel Heinz Brandt, operations officer; and stenographer Heinz Berger. Hitler survives with minor injuries: burst eardrums, burns, splinter wounds, protected by the heavy conference table that deflected the blast. Stauffenberg, believing Hitler is dead, flies to Berlin to begin the coup. Within hours, it becomes clear the Führer has survived. The conspiracy collapses. Stauffenberg is arrested and executed that evening. The Gestapo begins systematic arrest and interrogation of everyone connected to the plot. Over the following months, they will arrest 5,000 people. Approximately 200 will be executed after show trials. Hundreds more will die under torture. The investigation will eventually reach everyone who ever expressed doubt about Germany's ability to win the war or criticism of Hitler's leadership, including Rommel. August and September 1944. Rommel recovers slowly in a hospital in Herrlingen, Germany, near his home. The skull fracture and brain trauma require months of healing. He suffers from headaches, dizziness, partial vision loss in his left eye. Newspapers report he's recovering from wounds suffered in combat, maintaining the fiction that field marshals don't get wounded in random air attacks. Rommel watches from his hospital bed as Germany's military situation deteriorates on all fronts. Normandy has fallen. Paris is liberated. The Red Army is advancing into Poland. Allied bombing is destroying German cities systematically. The war is clearly lost, but Hitler demands continued resistance. Reports arrive of officers connected to the July 20th plot being executed. Rommel knows some of them. Von Stülpnagel has been arrested and committed suicide. Von Hofacker has been captured and is being interrogated. The investigation is expanding, following every lead, arresting anyone mentioned in testimony. Rommel begins to understand that his conversations with resistance members have made him vulnerable. September. General Speidel, Rommel's former chief of staff, is arrested. Under interrogation, Speidel confirms that Rommel knew about the conspiracy in general terms, though he insists Rommel never explicitly agreed to participate. This distinction matters morally, but not legally. Knowledge of conspiracy without reporting it is itself treason under Nazi law. Worse, other conspirators under torture have mentioned Rommel's name more definitively. Von Hofacker, suffering through brutal interrogation, has stated that Rommel agreed Germany must make peace, that Hitler must be removed, that Rommel could potentially lead a post-Hitler government. The testimony is extracted under torture and probably exaggerated. But Hitler doesn't care about nuance. Rommel's usefulness as propaganda figure has been overtaken by suspicion of disloyalty. The Führer who once praised Rommel as his favorite general now sees him as potential traitor. The decision about what to do with Germany's most famous field marshal requires balancing propaganda value against political necessity. October 1944. Hitler makes his decision. Rommel cannot be allowed to live. His knowledge of the conspiracy and private criticisms of Hitler's leadership make him dangerous. But he also cannot be publicly tried and executed. Rommel is too famous, too popular with German troops and civilians. A trial would reveal that senior Wehrmacht officers believed the war was lost, and Hitler was leading Germany to destruction. The testimony would be devastating for morale. The propaganda cost would be catastrophic. So Hitler chooses a third option. Rommel will be forced to commit suicide, given cyanide provided by the state, and his death will be presented as delayed result of wounds from France. His family will receive full military honors, retain his pension and property, and avoid persecution. In exchange, Rommel must die quietly, without trial, without public statement, without resistance. It's murder dressed as mercy, wrapped in the fiction that Rommel is dying of wounds rather than being eliminated for disloyalty. October 7th. Rommel receives visitors at his home. General Wilhelm Burgdorf, adjutant to Hitler, and General Ernst Meisel, second in command of Army Personnel Office. They arrive in a dark green Mercedes around noon. Rommel knows immediately why they've come. Generals don't visit field marshals at home for courtesy calls. He meets them in his study while his wife and son remain elsewhere in the house. Burgdorf presents two options. First, Rommel can face trial before the People's Court for conspiracy against the Führer. The verdict is predetermined: death. His family will be arrested, property confiscated, name destroyed, reputation forever linked with treason. Second, Rommel can take poison now, die within 15 minutes, and his death will be announced as a result of wounds from France. Military funeral with full honors, family protected, pension preserved, name intact. 5 minutes to decide. Rommel chooses the only choice that protects his family. He's traded his life for their safety, murdered by the regime he served for 12 years, forced to participate in his own execution to prevent worse fate for those he loves. It's the final betrayal, and there's no escape from it. 12:30 p.m. Rommel walks out of his house wearing his Afrika Korps leather jacket. His son Manfred, 15 years old, watches from a window as his father gets into the dark green Mercedes with the two generals. Rommel has told Lucy that he'll return in 15 minutes. He knows he won't. The car drives approximately 500 meters from the house to a quiet spot screened by trees. Burgdorf hands Rommel a small capsule, cyanide, fast-acting, relatively painless by the poison standards. Rommel takes it without ceremony. The cyanide works within 3 minutes. He dies in the back seat of the Mercedes, still wearing his desert jacket, killed by the state he served through tactical brilliance and moral blindness. Burgdorf and Meisel drive back to the Rommel home and inform Lucy that her husband has died from the wounds suffered in France. The lie is official now. The machinery of state propaganda begins transforming murder into martyrdom. October 18th. State funeral at Ulm City Hall. Hitler doesn't attend, but sends von Rundstedt to deliver the eulogy. The irony is savage. Von Rundstedt, who spent 2 years arguing with Rommel about tactics and doctrine, now praising him as Germany's greatest soldier. The eulogy is a masterpiece of propaganda fiction. Rommel died from wounds suffered in combat, killed by the enemy's cowardly air attack. A warrior to the end, beloved by the Führer, mourned by the nation. Everything is true except everything that matters. He didn't die from wounds. He was murdered by the regime he served. His real crime wasn't military incompetence, but moral awakening. He came to understand, too late, that he'd spent his career enabling evil. And when that understanding finally arrived, when he finally began questioning rather than obeying, the system he served eliminated him with bureaucratic efficiency. Thousands attend the funeral. Millions read the newspaper accounts. None know the truth. The myth of Rommel. The honorable soldier dies honorably in service of Germany is complete. The reality that he was murdered for finally recognizing what he'd been serving remains hidden for years. October 7, 1944, 12:15 p.m. The Rommel home in Herrlingen, Germany. Lucy Rommel answers the door to find two generals in full uniform standing on her doorstep, Wilhelm Burgdorf and Ernst Meisel. She knows immediately this isn't a social visit. Generals don't arrive unannounced at field marshals' homes unless the news is catastrophic. She calls for her husband, who emerges from his study knowing why they're here. For weeks he's been expecting this. Reports of arrests, interrogations, and executions connected to the July 20th plot have been escalating. Friends and colleagues have disappeared into Gestapo custody. Spiedel, his chief of staff, was arrested weeks ago. The net is closing, and now it has arrived at his door. He invites the generals into his study and closes the door. Lucy and their 15-year-old son, Manfred, remain in the living room, hearing muffled conversation but not words. The meeting lasts approximately 20 minutes. When the door opens, Erwin emerges looking aged and resigned. He tells Lucy he must leave with the generals. He'll return in 15 minutes. He's lying, and she knows he's lying, but there's nothing either can do about it. Manfred watches from an upstairs window as his father walks to the dark green Mercedes parked in front of the house. Erwin is wearing his favorite Afrika Korps leather jacket, brown, worn, comfortable, the jacket that's appeared in hundreds of photographs from the desert campaigns. It seems an odd choice for a formal meeting with generals. Manfred will later realize his father wore it deliberately, choosing to die in the uniform that represents his military identity. The car pulls away at 12:35 p.m. Lucy and Manfred wait, though waiting is futile. 15 minutes pass, 30, an hour. At 1:45 p.m., Bergdorf and Maisel return without Erwin. Maisel speaks first, his voice professionally flat. "Your husband has had a brain seizure on the way to the conference. He died almost immediately. I am most deeply sorry." It's a rehearsed line, delivered without conviction because everyone in the room knows it's false. Lucy doesn't ask questions. There's no point. The state has killed her husband, and asking questions will endanger her son and herself. The actual sequence of events is simpler and more brutal. The Mercedes drove approximately 500 meters from the Rommel house to a secluded spot on a forest road where trees screen the view from nearby houses. Bergdorf handed Rommel a small capsule, cyanide, German military issue, fast acting. He repeated the options one final time: take the poison now, or face trial that will destroy his family and legacy. Rommel took the capsule without drama or final statement. Cyanide works by preventing cells from using oxygen, causing death through internal asphyxiation. Symptoms begin within seconds: dizziness, rapid breathing, confusion. Unconsciousness follows within a minute. Death arrives within 3 minutes. Rommel died in the back seat of the Mercedes while Bergdorf and Maisel waited in front. Once they confirmed he was dead, they drove back to the house with their rehearsed story. The entire execution took less than 10 minutes. It was efficient, quiet, and absolute, exactly how the Nazi state handled inconvenient truths. The fiction continues immediately. By 2 p.m., military physicians are arriving at the Rommel home to examine the body and provide official cause of death: brain hemorrhage resulting from skull fracture suffered in France. The diagnosis is plausible enough that civilians won't question it, even though any competent medical examiner would recognize cyanide poisoning within minutes. But there will be no autopsy. Hitler has personally ordered that Rommel receive full military honors, which means the body must be treated with appropriate dignity. No cutting, no examination, no investigation that might reveal inconsistencies. The death certificate will state natural causes. The official announcement will describe him as a war hero who succumbed to wounds suffered in combat. Every element is carefully managed to transform murder into martyrdom, to preserve Rommel's reputation while eliminating his inconvenient knowledge and dangerous criticisms of Hitler's leadership. October 8. Newspapers across Germany carry the announcement: Field Marshal Erwin Rommel, the Desert Fox, Germany's most celebrated general, has died from wounds suffered in France. The reporting is detailed and completely fictional. He suffered brain trauma from air attack on July 17th, underwent multiple surgeries, showed initial improvement, then suffered fatal embolism on October 7th. Hitler has declared a day of national mourning. Rommel will receive a state funeral. The nation mourns the loss of its greatest commander. Reading these accounts, Germans accept them without question. Why wouldn't they? Rommel was wounded in France. That's documented fact. That he died months later from complications is tragic, but medically plausible. The idea that Germany's most famous field marshal was murdered by his own government is so outrageous that nobody considers it. The propaganda works because it wraps lies around truths, making the fiction inseparable from reality. Hitler's headquarters issues orders for Rommel's funeral: full military honors, national ceremony, prominent Nazi officials in attendance. But Hitler himself will not attend. Officially, This is due to pressing military situation. He cannot leave headquarters while battles rage on multiple fronts. Actually, it's because attending would require maintaining the fiction to Rommel's face, so to speak. Sending von Rundstedt to deliver the eulogy creates appropriate distance. Hitler can mourn publicly while avoiding personal involvement in a death he ordered. The funeral is scheduled for October 18th at Ulm City Hall, close to Rommel's birthplace in Heidenheim. Preparations begin for ceremony designed to convince the German public that their greatest general died honorably in service to the fatherland, rather than being eliminated for beginning to recognize what the fatherland had become. October 18th, 2 p.m., Ulm City Hall. Thousands of civilians line the streets. Military units stand at attention. Cameras capture everything for newsreels that will play in cinemas across Germany. Rommel's coffin, closed, draped with swastika flag, sits in the city hall's main chamber, surrounded by floral arrangements and honor guards. Von Rundstedt, the elderly field marshal who spent the last 4 years arguing with Rommel about tactics, delivers the eulogy. It's masterful propaganda. A pitiless destiny has snatched from us one of our greatest commanders. Field Marshal Rommel's name is forever inscribed in the history of the German people. His heart belonged to the Führer. The irony is grotesque. Rommel's heart hadn't belonged to the Führer. That's why he's dead. He'd begun questioning whether serving Hitler was serving Germany. That moment of moral clarity cost him his life. But von Rundstedt's eulogy erases this, transforming a murdered man into a loyal soldier who died fighting Germany's enemies. Lucy and Manfred sit in the front row, maintaining composure that German dignity demands while knowing everything being said is fiction. They cannot speak truth without destroying themselves. The deal Rommel accepted included their silence. If they reveal he was murdered, they'll be arrested for defaming the state. His pension will be revoked. His property will be confiscated. Manfred will be sent to labor camp or frontline unit where life expectancy is measured in weeks. The protection they bought with Erwin's suicide requires perpetual participation in the lie, so they sit silently while thousands mourn a man they didn't really know, while newspapers print tributes that omit everything important. While the Nazi state transforms its victim into its hero, its comprehensive betrayal, not just murdering Rommel, but conscripting his memory into serving the regime that killed him. The funeral cortege proceeds from Ulm to Herrlingen for burial. Military formations, party officials, mourners, all participating in theater designed to maintain illusion of honorable death. Rommel is buried in Herrlingen Cemetery, his grave marked with simple military headstone. The inscription notes his rank, decorations, and dates of birth and death. It doesn't mention how he died or who killed him. That truth will remain hidden for months as Germany's military situation continues deteriorating, as more officers disappear into Gestapo custody, as the July 20th conspirators face execution after show trials. The regime successfully conceals Rommel's murder until Germany's surrender in May 1945, when Allied investigators discovered documents revealing the real story. Even then, many Germans refused to believe it. The myth is so well constructed, the propaganda so effective, that truth struggles to overcome fiction even with documentary evidence. The irony of Rommel's death is that it validates everything he came to recognize too late. He spent his career believing he could be honorable soldier in service of dishonorable regime, that tactical excellence was separate from strategic evil, that personal integrity could coexist with institutional criminality. The regime he served for 12 years, whose wars he fought with tactical brilliance, whose leader he praised in letters and speeches, murdered him the moment he became inconvenient. There was no loyalty in return for his service, no honor in exchange for his victories, just bureaucratic elimination when his knowledge and doubts became liabilities. He enabled evil through military genius, and evil consumed him when he was no longer useful. It's a perfect encapsulation of what happens when talented people serve wicked systems. They're exploited until their usefulness expires, then disposed of without ceremony or mercy. Rommel died understanding this. The question is whether we do. November 1944. German newsreels still occasionally show footage of Rommel in North Africa, standing in a tank turret, scanning horizons with binoculars, conferring with staff officers in the desert. The footage is now accompanied by solemn narration about Germany's fallen hero. Schoolchildren learn about the Desert Fox, who fought courageously and died from wounds suffered in service to the fatherland. The myth is complete, distributed through every propaganda channel available to the Nazi state, and the myth will outlive the regime that created it. After Germany's surrender, when the full horror of Nazi crimes becomes public knowledge, the Allies will need examples of good Germans to enable denazification and German rearmament. Rommel, conveniently dead and unable to contradict myth-making, will serve perfectly. The British will publish his papers with significant editing. The Americans will study his tactics at military academies. The Bundeswehr will name bases after him. And the man who served Hitler faithfully for 12 years, who achieved tactical brilliance in wars of aggression and conquest, who knew about atrocities and did nothing, will be remembered as the Nazi general who wasn't really a Nazi. It's the final betrayal, not just of Rommel, but of truth itself. He's betrayed twice, once by the regime he served, again by the mythology that follows his death. The real Rommel, complex, flawed, brilliant in some ways and blind in others, disappears beneath layers of propaganda, both Nazi and Allied. What remains is a ghost, useful to everyone precisely because he's not there to object. The Desert Fox is dead. The legend is just beginning. April 12, 1945. The Nuremberg Palace of Justice, being prepared for the war crimes trials that will define how the world understands Nazi Germany. Allied prosecutors are reviewing documents, categorizing defendants, building cases. A British legal team reviews files on Wehrmacht commanders, determining who will face charges for war crimes. They come to Erwin Rommel's file and pause. The case is complicated. Evidence exists of war crimes committed by units under his command in North Africa. Deportation of Tunisian Jews to forced labor camps, brutal treatment of prisoners, execution of commandos in violation of Geneva Convention. But Rommel's personal involvement is difficult to establish. Did he order these actions specifically, or did they occur through institutional practices of the Wehrmacht while he focused on the tactical operations? The distinction matters legally. More importantly, Rommel's propaganda value as good German matters politically. The British need to denazify Germany while building it into an ally against Soviet Union. They need Germans to believe Wehrmacht fought honorably, that German military tradition can be separated from Nazi crimes. Prosecuting their most famous general undermines this narrative. The decision is made. Rommel's file is marked deceased, no further action required. The convenient truth that he's already dead allows Allied prosecutors to avoid inconvenient questions about his complicity. This is where the modern myth truly begins. Not in Nazi propaganda celebrating the Desert Fox, but in Allied legal decisions that require a clean Wehrmacht for Cold War purposes. In 1946, as trials proceed at Nuremberg, the Western Allies are already planning German rearmament. The Soviet Union represents new enemy. NATO will need German soldiers, German officers, German military expertise. But Germans cannot be expected to serve in Western alliance if their entire military tradition is criminalized. The solution is to distinguish between Nazi political leadership and German military professionals. Hitler, Himmler, Göring, these are the criminals. But professional soldiers like Rommel were supposedly just doing their duty, fighting honorably within accepted military conventions. This distinction is politically necessary and historically false. The Wehrmacht was thoroughly integrated with Nazi political objectives, participated systematically in war crimes and genocide, and cannot be meaningfully separated from the regime it served. But acknowledging this makes German rearmament impossible. So, the myth of the clean Wehrmacht is born, and Rommel becomes its exemplar. 1951. British military theorist B.H. Little Hart publishes the Rommel Papers, supposedly faithful translation of Rommel's wartime writings. The book becomes international bestseller, translated into 14 languages, establishing Rommel as military genius whose talents were tragically wasted by Hitler's strategic incompetence. Little Hart's introduction and commentary frame Rommel as a professional soldier trapped serving criminal regime, increasingly disillusioned, ultimately participating in resistance. Its compelling narrative with one major problem. It's not quite what Rommel wrote. Little Hart has edited the papers extensively. References to Hitler are changed from dutiful praise to implied criticism. Passages accepting Nazi racial ideology are deleted entirely. Sections where Rommel blames subordinates are softened. Combat descriptions are enhanced for dramatic effect. Approximately 23% of original material is excluded from publication. The omissions aren't random. Every deletion makes Rommel more sympathetic, more critical of Nazis, more honorable. Little Hart isn't deliberately lying. He believes he's revealing the real Rommel beneath Nazi propaganda. But in doing so, he creates different propaganda, one that serves different political purposes. The book influences military education for generations. American staff colleges study Rommel's campaigns, learning lessons about mobile warfare, combined arms coordination, and aggressive exploitation. Israeli military historians analyze his desert tactics. British Doctrine incorporates his principles of leading from the front and making decisions at the crisis point. Soviet theorists examine his methods while dismissing his strategic failures. By 1960, Rommel is studied more extensively at international military academies than any other World War II commander. This isn't entirely unjustified. His tactical innovations were genuine. His understanding of armored warfare was sophisticated. His ability to exploit enemy confusion was exceptional. But the academic study divorces tactics from context, examining how he fought while ignoring what he fought for. Students learn about Ghazala without discussing that he was advancing to destroy British presence in North Africa as part of Axis' campaign to dominate the Mediterranean. They study his defensive doctrine for Normandy without acknowledging he was defending a regime conducting genocide. The tactical brilliance becomes its own justification, separate from moral implications. 1955. West Germany joins NATO. The Bundeswehr needs traditions, heroes, and institutional memory that aren't contaminated by Nazi associations. The solution is selective historical memory. Wehrmacht combat excellence without Nazi ideology, German military professionalism without war crimes, heroic resistance without acknowledging most soldiers served loyally to the end. Rommel becomes central to this project. He's a genuinely talented commander. That can't be disputed. He died in 1944. He can't complicate the narrative. And he supposedly participated in resistance to Hitler. He can be presented as example of German military honor. By 1965, the Bundeswehr has established Rommel barracks in Dornstadt, near his birthplace. Multiple German military bases use his name. Officer training includes studying his campaigns. He's been successfully transformed from Nazi field marshal into acceptable German military hero. But the myth begins fracturing in the 1990s, as archives open and historians ask harder questions. Documents from Tunisia reveal that in July 1942, while Rommel was advancing toward El Alamein, his command area saw a systematic roundup of Jewish civilians. Over 2,500 Tunisian Jews were seized from their homes and sent to forced labor camps under conditions that killed hundreds. The operations were coordinated through Rommel's headquarters. Supply trucks and guards came from Afrika Korps units. The deportations happened with his knowledge and organizational support. He didn't order them personally. That distinction matters to some historians. But he knew about them, provided resources for them, and did nothing to prevent them. This pattern of looking away characterizes his relationship with Nazi crimes throughout his career. He wasn't ideologically committed to genocide. He probably found it distasteful, but it was someone else's responsibility, someone else's problem. His job was tactical operations, not moral judgments about regime policy. 2004, Hamburg, Germany. The city council debates renaming Rommel Street, prompted by citizens groups demanding reckoning with Wehrmacht's role in Nazi crimes. Protesters argue that honoring Wehrmacht commanders, even talented ones, normalizes military service to criminal regime. Defenders argue that Rommel was a professional soldier whose tactical skill shouldn't be conflated with Nazi ideology. The debate becomes heated, generational. touching raw nerves about German responsibility and historical memory. Young Germans ask why their grandparents' generation needed military heroes so badly they ignored inconvenient truths. Older Germans argue that not everyone who wore Wehrmacht uniform was a war criminal, that tactical competence doesn't equal moral guilt. The vote is close. The street keeps its name. But the controversy reveals how contested Rommel's legacy remains 80 years after his campaigns, 60 years after his death. Modern military historians have reached qualified consensus. Rommel was brilliant tactician, mediocre strategist, and politically naive enabler of criminal regime. His tactical innovations were genuine. His understanding of mobile warfare, combined arms operations, and exploitation of enemy confusion influenced military doctrine worldwide. His strategic judgment was consistently poor. He never understood logistics, habitually overextended his forces, achieved tactical victories that had no strategic significance, and his moral culpability is clear. He knew about war crimes committed under his command, benefited from Nazi patronage, and participated in wars of aggression and conquest. The fact that he wasn't personally sadistic, that he eventually grew disillusioned with Hitler, that he died at the regime's hands, none of this erases his 12 years of loyal service to evil. The final accounting is uncomfortable because it resists simple categorization. Rommel wasn't a Nazi ideologue. He never joined the party, showed no interest in racial theory, and apparently found SS methods distasteful. But he was worse than an ideologue in some ways, an opportunist who advanced his career through serving criminal regime without questioning its purposes. Ideologues at least believe they're serving noble cause, however twisted. Rommel just served, achieving brilliance in service of evil through combination of ambition, political naivete, and moral compartmentalization. He represents something more common and more dangerous than fanaticism, the talented professional who places career advancement above moral clarity, who focuses narrowly on technical excellence while ignoring larger contexts, who enables evil through specialized competence rather than ideological commitment. 2024. Military academies worldwide still teach Rommel's campaigns. Students learn about the Ghost Division's advance through France, the Desert Campaigns, the Atlantic Wall preparations. They study his decisions, analyze his tactics, debate what he should have done differently. This has value. His military methods were innovative and influential, but the study too often divorces tactics from morality, examining how without asking why. The complete history of Erwin Rommel isn't just about tactical excellence. It's about what happens when talented people serve wicked systems. It's about the dangers of political naivete combined with professional ambition. It's about how easy it is to compartmentalize moral responsibility when your immediate responsibilities are technical. It's about the difference between being honorable person and serving honorable cause. And it's about how myths are constructed from selective truths, how propaganda outlives the regimes that create it, and how difficult it is to see clearly what we need to believe. Rommel's grave in Herrlingen remains a site of pilgrimage. Some visitors are military historians studying his campaigns. Some are Germans seeking connection to less shameful parts of their military history. Some are tourists photographing a famous grave. The headstone is simple. Field Marshal Erwin Rommel, born November 15, 1891, died October 14, 1944. The dates are partly false. He died October 7th, but official announcement delayed 3 days for propaganda purposes. Even his grave marker participates in the fiction. Everything about Rommel's legacy is like this: truths mixed with lies, facts contaminated by mythology, genuine military skill inseparable from complicity and evil. We can acknowledge his tactical brilliance while recognizing his strategic failures. We can understand his personal courage while condemning his moral blindness. We can study his campaigns while refusing to separate them from the criminal wars they advanced. The complete history of Erwin Rommel requires holding multiple uncomfortable truths simultaneously. He was brilliant and he was complicit. He was courageous and he was naive. He earned his reputation and he didn't deserve his legend. This complexity is where truth lives, messy, ambiguous, resistant to simple judgment. The desert fox was real. The myth was constructed. Our task is to understand the difference and learn from both. Not to worship genius divorced from morality, but to recognize that genius serves whoever commands it, and that choosing what to serve matters more than how skillfully we serve it. This is Rommel's final lesson, the one his admirers miss and his detractors oversimplify. Talent without wisdom serves evil just as effectively as malice, perhaps more effectively, because competence makes evil efficient. The field marshal lies in Herrlingen's soil, his reputation contested, his legacy unresolved. That irresolution is appropriate. He lived in moral ambiguity and died in it. History should remember him the same way, clearly, completely, without comfortable myths to soften uncomfortable truths.